back in class. We are...
This is the class you wake up early to go to. Actually, we don't have a time. You can listen to us whenever.
Yep. Just so you guys know, we've been getting a little warm up with some of our own little opinions off on this subject today because it's so fascinating. Charles Darwin might be a top guy that I would just want to pick his brain and talk about, and then use the advantage of 150, 170 years of understanding and new knowledge, just to kind of throw it at him and just watch his mind be blown like he's blown mine this whole week.
Just to show him, like, okay, this is where you saw evolution going. This is now where we're at just 170 years later. Mm-hmm. Could you have imagined it ever going that fast? Or, just having him be blown away at just everything that has happened up to this point and what he did, how much it's changed everything.
And how much religion is still fighting it.
Yeah, exactly.
They still can't believe you, Charles.
Well, I am Professor Chris, as you all know. The man to my left, he's the Ryan to my Hugh. He's the Rob to my Ryan. And he's the Beetle to my Earthworm, which we'll explain that one a little bit later in the episode. That's Professor Adam, everyone. Charles Darwin is... The name should be familiar to mostly anybody who's even moderately versed in history, as, I guess, the godfather of evolutionary science. Evolutionary theory.
Even if you don't know his name, just to throw a couple things out there, Darwin Awards for people that do dumb things and die, survival of the fittest, natural selection. All these things that you hear about evolution all come from one man.
The city of Darwin in Australia, I think.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, he
was never there, but one of his shipmates came back, was like, yo, Darwin's cool. We're going to name this place Darwin.
Mm-hmm. But somebody that I guess kind of doesn't go really behind the scenes, because like people are usually familiar with like Darwinism and stuff like that, but that maybe most people don't know the whole story about, and how impactful and how much of his fucking, like, this wasn't a guy that just rolled out of bed and was like, you know what? I wonder if we're all descended from a common ancestor. No, this was something that lifelong passion of just working his way from these little interests, and then putting it all together finally and being like, holy shit, something's going on here. And then pouring the rest of his life into determining if this concept or this theory, held water.
Yeah, this is a guy that kind of sparked the whole field of biology, and he went on the voyage for the Beagle as a geologist.
Yeah.
So he's a multifaceted man, just interesting as all hell. Before we get into him, don't forget to rate, review, subscribe. 5 stars would be excellent. Get at us on our socials. We love hearing from you guys. We love talking to you guys. There's so many kind of things that we wonder how the episodes are taken by you guys. One thing, Twitter X, we try to be on there as much as possible. It's not really easy for us to be on there because, unfortunately, being a history podcast, any time that we've ever typed in the name of a president or a ruler or any kind of sport or anything like that, X just picks up on that and sends you down a rabbit hole of what's going on in the presidential election, and people bitching about the Olympics, and people bitching about Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, and that stuff's just not fun for us. So if we don't get back to you immediately on X, we will try to get to you eventually, but it's
a cesspool of human opinions.
Depending on if you love X, hate X, whatever, it kind of feels like a wasteland, and it just almost feels like it exists to piss people off.
Just hit us up on the other shit.
Yeah.
If you have X, then you have other forms of social media. And without further ado, let's get into, and I love this term someone used, the evolutionary revolutionary that is Charles Darwin. right, so we got Charles Robert Darwin, born all the way back September. Jesus Christ,
September?
February 12th, 1809, in Shrewsbury, England.
Do you think that this was a town that was founded by shrews?
I don't know. It was in Shrewsbury, Shropshire. He was the fifth of six children and was born to Robert and Susanna. Robert was a very well-to-do man. In the town that they lived in, what was the name of the house? Like, the Hill, right? They just knew it as like the Hill.
Childhood house. Was it? I
Yeah,
don't
just
remember
something like the
Childhood
Hill. But he was born into what would be considered more of an upper class, like wealthier family. His father was a gentleman. Apparently, that was just a thing.
Well, he was a doctor too, but yeah, he was a gentleman
But
as
that
well.
was like today, like, the terminology for gentleman is just someone with polite manners. You open the door,
Yeah.
thank you, all that kind of stuff.
You can
Back
be a
then,
dickhead
it was
gentleman.
actually like you had to go study to become a gentleman.
You have a library at home full of many leather-bound books.
And your apartment smells of rich mahogany.
That makes you a gentleman. As far as growing up, he had four sisters. He had one brother, which thank God he had a brother, because if he had five sisters, I don't know where we'd be today. But had a fairly good interest, I think, as a child into collecting things. He also really lucked out because his parents were more Unitarian, which not exactly sure what it is, but they're more open to ideas. It's not such a God-centric type of...
It's still the establishment of like creationism is still heavily in belief, but they were more of a free thinking, I guess, sect.
Less that God controls everything.
Yeah, and part of that, I think, also his grandfather, a guy named Erasmus? Erasmus Darwin. Charles wasn't really a stranger to the concept of evolution, or what was known at the time. It wasn't called evolution back then. It was called transmutation. And
Sounds cooler.
it does actually sound cooler. So his grandfather, old Erasmus, he was also a poet and wrote some fantastical stories, things like that. And he actually wrote this epic poem. It was a poetic fantasy or something called Zoonomia, and it kind of had general concepts of evolution and then common descent. So evolution basically is the concept that a species will gain adaptive traits in order to increase its survivability. Common descent is the theory that all species are essentially, when you track it back far enough, are descended from a single entity, species.
Yeah, like
Creature.
a primary...
The starting point.
Yeah.
The prime biological whatever the fuck.
So in this book that Erasmus wrote, it was called Zoonomia, and the passage that he wrote that has always kind of stuck, I think, with Darwin, and something that I had no idea that this would have been so far pre-Darwin, because it was his grandpa. It says, "Would it be too bold to imagine that in a great length of time since the Earth began to exist, because back then there was still some questions about how old the Earth was, but we were starting to realize that instead of talking about thousands, we were talking more about millions of years. Perhaps mutations, perhaps millions of ages before the commencement of the history of mankind, would it be too bold to imagine all the warm-blooded animals have arisen from one living filament, which the great first cause endued with animality, great first cause, God, with the power of acquiring new parts, attended with new propensities, directed by irritations, sensations, volitions, and associations, thus possessing the faculty to continuing to improve by its own inherent activity."
So just by living and by passing on its desirable genetic traits.
And all of the traits it needed to live.
Yes. When that theory, came out, it's the reason we don't know that it's Erasmus, Darwin, and Charles Darwin, no one else has really heard of his grandfather, because those theories were still rooted in the concept of creationism, where it would be there's a common ancestor that are all, that's shared by all mammals or whatnot. But that common ancestor was created by God. So it was like, yeah, like you guys are still right in which God created this. I'm just saying that once he created that animal, he created it with the ability to adapt and survive.
Yep, it's divine creation that allowed for evolution.
Yes.
Which, I mean, I if there was more evidence towards the divine creation of it, I don't hate that. That seems like a pretty good explanation of how things could have happened just based upon like the magic of life.
You're still basing that fact though that what do creationists think for is the age of the earth? It's like 10,000 years, right?
Yeah, I thought it was like 4,000 or something like that. Maybe it's 10,000.
Let's give him 10,000.
Okay.
You're also then assuming at that point that evolution works so quickly that in 10,000 years since the first the original ancestor, all these other species and offshoots had time to develop around that.
Yeah.
Within that 10,000 year period. It's a much, much slower process. As far as his childhood, he grows up in a larger family.
Years.
Huh?
6 to 10,000
Jesus.
years.
So he grows up, in a pretty standard family for the time. His parents were also abolitionists, which was, I don't know how much of a rarity it was. I have to assume it was pretty rare to be an outspoken abolitionist. Again, abolitionists are people that don't believe in slavery and believe it should be abolished, hence abolitionists. And so he did grow up in more of a free thinking and what you would consider a left-leaning family, if you're trying to put it in the parlance of our times, man.
Yeah, a liberal-minded.
Yes, exactly. He doesn't have a lot of memories of his mother because she ends up dying when he was 8 years old. And when speaking about that, he's like, I don't really remember much about her. My strongest memories of basically her when she was on her deathbed, like in her black,
That's tough.
like, which is crazy that like, when he says deathbed, does he mean she was dead? And because when you say someone is on their deathbed, is that just to suggest that's the bed in which they're going to die on?
Yeah,
Like,
I think it's the last bed they're going to be in.
so are they dressing her in black while she's still alive? Because they're like, hey, we're just getting ready for the inevitable.
I don't know. I don't know if clothes... This is going to sound dumb. I don't know if clothes had color back then. Had we already had, like, dyed textiles?
You had white, black, or gray.
Okay.
At that point, maybe you had brown. Like, there had been dyes discovered and everything. I'm sure that they weren't very... Some of them were pretty fucking toxic.
Yeah, not
I'm
a lot
guessing.
of blues or
But I'm pretty sure
greens.
there was black clothing back then.
And there again, we're talking about were there colors on clothes in 1809, but he was born a little over 200 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Not that long ago did we start down this path.
Yeah. Which at the same time, it's like, oh shit, we had to wait to get... Only 200 years ago, we finally reached this point where we were looking around at stuff and being like, kind of look the same, but they look kind of different. I wonder how that happened.
Yep, we're still pretty new into this evolutionary game.
So his father, as he's growing up, it's kind of the expectation that Charles is going to follow in his father's footsteps and be a good, respectable doctor. Charles actually, develops a pretty keen interest in beetles and bugs, what would be considered entomology, and is just like that. And that to me is the most natural thing for a kid. You're just going out and fucking exploring, but you get really fucking into beetles, apparently. This guy was horny for beetles.
Yeah, he sounds like such a fun kid. One of the parts of the research I did for this was listening to his autobiography, and I could never hear a clip of Darwin's voice because the guy that narrated it, he is Darwin's voice to me now. Mm-hmm. But he tells a story... Huh?
Was it British?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, then that helps.
He ends up being sent off to boarding school. It was the same boarding school that his brother went to shortly after his mom died. So his dad didn't really want him around too much.
That wasn't the man's job back then. Like a single, like he was probably had, if the family was more well-to-do, he probably did have a housekeeper or nanny. And then as soon as the mother was gone, he's like, housekeeper can't do all the work, so we're just going to have to send him away.
I'm not going to pay her more to do this.
That, and I'm not stepping in to do any of this shit. That's not my job.
But he tells a story in his autobiography of going into town with a friend, and they walked into a bake shop, and the kid had credit or some sort of deal with the baker where he walked in and he asked for 2 cakes and the baker gave him 2 cakes and they walked out without paying. And he's like, well, how'd you do that? And he goes, my grandpa was really big in this town and he made donations to all of these places. And the one thing that he said after these donations were, anybody that is wearing my gray hat, if they come in and they move it in a certain direction, you are to give them whatever they ask for without charging them. And Darwin's like, I'm not buying that. He goes, okay, well, let's go into this other store. Kid walks into another store. He tilts the cap one way. He asks for something. The guy gives it to him, and he ends up walking out. So Darwin's like, this is awesome. He goes, yeah, anybody wearing the hat, go ahead and take the hat. He goes, take my hat, go back into the bake store. This is the motion that you make with the hat, and he'll just give you the cakes. So Darwin walks into the cake store. He asks for 2 cakes. Guy hands him the cakes.
I'm assuming these are like little handheld.
Got to be something small, like cupcake,
Guy's
maybe.
like, God damn it, man! I don't have that many fucking cakes. You know how hard it is to make a cake in fucking
true.
1820.
Darwin goes ahead and tilts the cap the way that the kid had told him to, and then starts walking towards the door, and the baker sprints over and jumps in front of the door to stop him from leaving, and Darwin freaks out and throws the cakes on the ground and then darts around him and goes outside. And he walks outside, and the kid's just rolling, laughing, seeing how panicked he is. And in the autobiography, Darwin goes, and that was the time that I realized that he wasn't truly my friend. So there is a little bit of a social aspect to Darwin that I think not only was he super curious about things, but I think he was a little mischievous. There were even parts during the autobiography that he would talk about where he's like, I came to the conclusion that I was a pretty naughty child.
Yeah.
So he definitely seemed like he had a zest for life.
He got into some shit, and in order to be who he was, his whole life is going to be trying to get into shit.
Yeah.
So as he's, growing up again, starting to kind of, father wants him to lean toward the medical practice. 1825, he spends a summer basically being an apprentice to his father. This was a time, and this fact blew my fucking mind.
About doctors?
About what the percentage was for survivability.
Yep.
Okay. So up until, is it 1910?
Yeah.
1900 to 1910. It was somewhere in that range. Up until 1900 to 1910, you were more likely to be killed by the doctor and by surgery than to be cured by the doctor. Right? Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
Or was it just specifically surgery?
I'm pretty sure it was by the doctor and underneath their care because I don't think we had x-rays at this point.
No.
We were probably still pretty heavy into the leech game to try to fix and cure some things. That's not always good.
No. Opium was for certain stuff. Also, anesthesia is not really a thing. So at one point when, his father actually ends up sending him to the University of Edinburgh, so it goes to Scotland, medical school in October of 1825, and he's 16. I believe he's 16 at this point. 1825 minus, so he's 16 years old.
I don't think college was on the same age scale as it was or is now.
No. I don't believe it was either because, people also didn't live as long, so you had to try to cram stuff in. But you also weren't going to a school, a K through 12. I think you probably went to a boarding school that was like, hey, we're going to teach you 1st grade through 8th grade. And then, but you're a college student now.
Yeah.
So he goes to University of Edinburgh Med School and medical is not his thing. He doesn't like it. One of the things that stands out to him the most that probably turned him off to the biggest degree is he was observing, they used to have the operating theaters where, it's the little circular area and you would then have like the tiered seating where people could observe these fucking surgeries and operations. And there was a guy being operated on, no anesthesia. So this guy is awake and being held down while they fucking carve into this guy with scalp. And he's just watching this and he fucking hates blood already. And now you have this person that's basically screaming. Did you have people? So, you go into an operating room today. You have the surgeon.
Yeah.
You then have the technician, anesthesiologist, a few nurses, probably assistants, things like that. Those people that just, I'm going to be in charge of the anesthesia, make sure this person's sedated, you're in charge of this, and this, hand me my instruments, blah, blah, blah. How many of the people were in that room to fucking hold the fucking patient still? Because they were probably strapped down, first of all, so they weren't thrashing. But then you can only strap someone down so much where they can still move and everything while you're trying to, like, of course, if you're getting cut into, and even if you know, okay, you're getting cut into, you don't know it at the time, but you have less of a chance of survival, more of a chance of dying than of surviving during this time frame. So you're already desperate enough that you think whatever you have is going to kill you. And there had to be some type of like common societal rumor about that, right? Like you would see people going for surgery. People wouldn't come out of surgery, they would die. You would know certain people that went and had surgery that survived. And in your head, you had to have kept some type of unconscious tally where you're like, surgery does not seem like it's very successful. More people die during surgery.
It seems more like a fast forward button to death.
So you're already in there because you have no chance outside of this smaller chance of survival. And you're still not going to be able to hold still if someone's your human fight or flight response is going to try to get you the fuck out of there. So how many of those deaths were just from people? And he's like, I nicked something. Shit.
Nicked an artery, nicked an organ. Well, and at the same time, too, just like you're talking about all those, you're not being cut open with an obsidian blade back then. You're being cut open with the sharpest thing that they have at that point in time. I don't know what the sharpest thing could have been.
You're not being cut open with an obsidian?
No, like now we use such fine scalpels to cut somebody open that their cut is fine enough to where sometimes you don't even have a scar to do things.
Yeah.
They don't have that back then. They're using like butter knives and shit like that to cut you open.
They're using something that they can sharpen on a whetstone.
Yeah.
Or something like the sharpest that
So
they can
kitchen
possibly
knife.
get. Yeah.
You're getting a kitchen knife to open you up.
What we have as far as like a Japanese kitchen knife or whatever you're able to sharpen your knife with from Sharper Image, they have less than that to sharpen these medical instruments. So yeah, definitely Charles was not looking to go into the medical practice.
Well, before you go on, you keep using the word anesthesia. The first thing that they created out of this was chloroform.
Yeah.
So, like the most rudimentary of ways to knock people out. How many times after that, when chloroform was invented, that you would just come out of the haze of the chloroform mid-surgery and somebody'd have to throw the rag back over your face? No shit,
because that's not a calculated dose. It's just like, is the rag soaked?
Yep.
Throw it over their fucking mouths.
And we have to figure out how to control their breathing.
Yeah.
Without like a ventilator
or anything.
How many people
just stop breathing? They're like, too much chloroform. Too much chloroform.
One of the nurses in the back just goes, beep.
Mm-hmm. That's where the sound comes from. I wonder if they did some type of run up during operations where they were just like, okay, we need you to check in like 3 days in advance. Like, why so long? They're like, we have to find out what chloroform does to you. So for the next 3 days, we're going to be knocking you out with chloroform and seeing how long it takes you to wake up, because then we'll know when we need to chloroform you again when you're under surgery. Well, is that going to hurt me? I mean, surgery's already risky enough, right? You're already signed up for this surgery. So, I mean, 50-50 that you'll make it to the surgery and we're not going to OD you on chloroform.
History of Surgery podcast is going to have to happen eventually.
Yeah.
We're going to have to talk about that.
So, yeah, not a big fan of med school. While he's there, he does kind of find certain interest because it's not just it's medical centric, but you're still taking other subjects that you're able to take as your electives and things like that. And he joins this thing called the Plinian Society. And is this Pliny the Elder? Is this anything to do with that, do you think? Because it was a natural history group.
Yeah, I could see that being.
I'm going to look that up while you keep going.
One of the other things that he actually paid attention to and really, I think, maybe did enjoy, he wasn't the greatest taxidermist, but he was actually taught taxidermy by a freed slave.
Yeah.
So he was kind of learning these skills that would maybe carry him on later in life. Getting back to what Chris was talking about with loving collecting bugs and beetles and all that, he credits a lot of his growing up and kind of his couth nature and his ability to be a good person to growing up with his sisters. And one of the things that he said that his sisters had taught him was that while collecting beetles, it's probably not right to kill a beetle to put it in your collection. So he wasn't just collecting live beetles, he was collecting dead beetles, anything that he could find to start putting into these collections. Mm-hmm. And later on, of course, he pretty much kills everything. But
yeah,
it's like there's a certain time in his life where he figures out that I got to get these collections back to Great Britain, so I'm just going to kill stuff so I can get them
it's
embalmed.
For the good. It's for my works. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Two things that he also really said that he regretted One was he regretted not doing super well in the medical school side of things because it would have helped him out so much as far as like dissection. He said that he wasn't great with dissection, so in order to kind of pull apart some of these species and take a look at their organs and their systems, he would have to have done better doing that, but he was doing that with human bodies instead of animals. I think there's a little bit different there. He also said that he wasn't a good drawer. Like he didn't sketch stuff well, and there were two beetles that he had collected. I don't know if this was in Edinburgh or when he goes to Christ College, but he had actually
Cambridge.
he submitted them into a journal, a natural history journal, and he said that it was the highlight of his life up to that point to see two pictures that his sister had drawn of these two beetles that he had collected. And next to it, it said, credit C. Darwin, Esquire. I don't know how he got an Esquire that quick, but like just to see his name printed in this journal gave him so much joy.
And you got to look at it from the perspective also of, well, how big of a deal is this? He got some beetles in a book. This was at a time when print was the entertainment. That's how information was disseminated. If you're not shouting it from a street corner, it's all going to be in print. So having something in the primary form of media of the time is a big deal, especially at that age, to be able to get that in there. Not only that, but these scientific journals were, printing stuff wasn't cheap.
Yeah.
Like you had to have a printing press. So in order to have something that was good enough to be warranted to get into these publications and take the time to print this kind of stuff, kind of shows how good he was already at that point. And it seems weird to be like, well, he was good at getting beetles. When your only form of entertainment is either like reading and shit, you have to go find other forms of entertainment. So that's why you had fucking people bird watching all the time. You had people that were really into like bug collections and butterflies and all that kind of shit. So it was a much bigger deal. You're like, well, how many people are into fucking bug collecting nowadays? It's like back then, like bug collecting might have been like the kitty's titties.
Yeah.
For hobbies.
He mentions at one point, he said something like, at one point in his life as a child, he didn't know why everyone didn't want to be an ornithologist when they grew up, because he just loved looking at birds. Like you said, it was something that was interesting to him, but it was kind of the only game in town. Not only did he really like looking at birds, he really liked hunting birds. He was a big fan of hunting birds, and in the time during the summer that he was at Edinburgh, he would go spend time with, I believe it was his uncle on his mother's side. His name was Josiah Wedgwood, and they had these just massive bird hunting grounds. And he said that at one point in time during the summers, he would actually leave his hunting boots by the side of his bed, so he didn't have to waste any time finding them in the morning to get out onto the hunting grounds. And he would go out onto the hunting grounds and just hunt all day long.
He's like, I love shooting birds.
Yeah. He actually had a system to where he had a string that was on a button that was tied to his jacket, and every time he shot a bird, he would tie another knot in it. He went out one time with his uncle and somebody else, and they were hunting, and every single time he shot a bird, when he turned around, the other two guys were reloading their guns. And he's like, did everybody see that? And they're like, yeah, no, we shot at it too, so you can't count it on your string of knots because we don't know which one of us hit it. And he said after like 5 or 6 times of doing it, he finally got furious with him. He's like, you guys aren't really doing that. And the guy that was leading the hunting expedition out there was in on it too. He's like, no, I saw all three of you shoot at the same time. I don't know which one of you hit it.
He's like, I'm going by myself.
Yeah. So he was just so easily manipulated and fucked with. But at the same time, you really only do that to people that you kind of enjoy being around.
Yeah.
So him being out there and shooting stuff, he said that he took his rifle to college with him. And the explanation didn't make a whole lot of sense to me as far as capping the nipple on his gun or whatever. But he would practice aiming at candles. And when he would fire, or when he pulled the trigger on his gun, there would be a little puff of air that would come out of the gun.
Yeah.
And if he was accurate enough, it would hit the candle and it would extinguish the flame. And one of his professors said that he was a really odd guy because he was constantly cracking a horsewhip in his room.
Yeah.
Because he said every time he'd walk by, he'd hear horse whips coming from the room.
Gah!
And it was just Darwin up there practicing his bird hunting.
Yeah, I wonder if you would have to load it with at least some black powder to
Something.
create the explosion that created the air.
Yeah.
There was just no ball in it, so it didn't have a projectile.
Something like that.
That would still be pretty fucking weird if you're sitting in your dorm and you hear the black powder going off and he's like, "What the fuck is that?" He's like, "Fucking Darwin's putting out candles again." So med school's a no-go. He ends up coming back and having a talk with his father.
Oh, Plinian Society.
Yeah, so he ends up joining the Plinian Society.
Was that...
Oh, I couldn't find if it was named after Pliny the Elder. So yeah, he's already into natural history at that point. His dad's like, well, shit, if you're not going to go into the medical field, you're going to have to go into something respectable and that's worthy of a gentleman or a gentleman's profession. He's like, you know what? Just become a priest. You can, become a priest and then you'll still have time to go do all of the stuff you want to do as far as your fucking bug collecting and your hunting, but it's still a respectable profession that, you're not going to bring dishonor to the family name.
Well, back at this time, priests and clergymen weren't just priests and clergymen for the church. You had early scientists that were men of the cloth that had like these...
Which is such a contradiction. It sounds
yeah.
It's a contradiction because the information they're already going in to that study with a starting point, and they know where that starting point was, and it's the creation of whatever Garden of Eden, that kind of bullshit. Everything that you're going to determine after that, you're going to fit that narrative. You're going to find a way to circle back to it. So it's the inmates running the prison is basically what it is it's able to. And also, if you're finding out information that goes against any of the church's beliefs or teaching, that information just doesn't get disseminated. It's not like today where one person can fucking tweet or send something out and all of a sudden it catches and people are aware of it all over the world. If that information wasn't getting out, it wasn't getting out.
Well, and even then you would think that it was a failed experiment if it provided you with information outside of a religious divine creation.
We're not supposed to understand this right now. Yeah, God doesn't want us to understand this.
Darwin thinks that it was probably his sisters that dropped the dime on him, that told his dad that he wasn't really doing well in school and showing up to lectures. Before he ends up leaving Edinburgh, he actually starts learning animal classification, and he worked with the university museum, putting collections together. So he's still finding this niche hobby that he really enjoys, but he's at school not doing the medical side of it, but he's still enjoying doing that.
Yeah. He's not doing what he was sent there to do,
exactly.
But he's taking advantage of all the other resources for the shit that he is into.
Well, he also, at this point in time, says in his autobiography that he fell in love with novels. He fell in love with reading Shakespeare and kind of taking his mind away from maybe being at school and doing the studying. And later on in life, he says that one of his greatest regrets is he fell out of love with those things because he was so tied into these medical journals and everything else that he never really read anything for fun. So at this point in time, he's still kind of like half in, half out of the world before he finally figures out what he wants to do. And when he ends up getting pulled out and going to Christ College in Cambridge, it was to push him into this clergy role. But he ends up going there because his cousin William Darwin Fox was also attending. They become lifelong friends, but Fox opens up this world to him at Christ College that he didn't have at Edinburgh that pushes him further away from being a man of the cloth.
Yeah, exactly. Also, just a little fact. So you have Cambridge and then Cambridge University. So when you say Cambridge, there are several colleges and universities within Cambridge. It's kind of like a learning hub. But the one, when you think about it and you just say, oh, he went to Cambridge, it's usually Cambridge University that you're thinking about. So that was in January, I think, 1828 that he starts at Christ College. He gets really continues the interest in hunting, but then also gets really good at horseback riding as well. So, and that's how you got places, and that's how you hunted, and that's how you rode when you were hunting with the dogs and everything. That's how you kept up. You'd have all the guys out there handling the dogs, and you and your buddies would get up there on the red jackets and be like, "We are going on a fox hunt."
Did you hear the beetle story from Christ College?
Yeah, the one where so he's out and he finds a beetle he'd never seen before.
Yep.
And he's like, fucking jackpot. And he grabs the beetle and then he looks over and he's like, holy shit, another beetle I've never seen before. And so he grabs the second beetle and he's like, this is the best day ever.
2 hands, 2 beetles.
And then he looks down and he's like, fucking what? A third beetle? And so he's looking around. He's like, well, my hands are full of beetles. Pops one of the beetles into his mouth and reaches down and grabs the third one. Well, the beetle in his mouth isn't too happy about being in his mouth, so it excretes some type of like acidic, whatever fucking. All I think of is possibly a stink bug.
Yeah.
Being in there and basically sprays the shit in his mouth. He spits it out, loses that beetle, drops one of the other ones. Which at that point are these beetles just fast as shit? Because you think he could just look back down and be like, oh, there it is. But he ends up losing the other 2.
I think whatever sprayed in his mouth was pretty bad, that it might have distracted him. But at the same time, isn't it kind of funny that a guy that like hangs his hat on evolution ends up getting sprayed in the mouth by an evolutionary tactic that a beetle learned not to get
Maybe
eaten?
that is something that just clicked in his head. It's like, I wonder how long he's had the ability to do this.
And he's just back at his dorm room and he's just putting different beetles in his mouth to see which ones will spray
get a
him.
reaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, so him and Will Darwin Fox, he kind of leads him into the practice of entomology, which is the study of all insects. He also introduces and he meets Professor John Henslow. He develops this relationship with Henslow where Henslow serves in a mentor status. I think Henslow, was he a geologist or just
Botanist?
Botanist. Okay, that's right. He was a botanist, so study of plants. Anyone that was in the study of anything within nature was also kind of considered would be a naturalist, because also geologists were naturalists, things like that. People that studied the natural world. And developed such a relationship that he actually gained the title of the man who walks with Winslow, because he was just around campus. He was constantly always following him around having these discussions.
Well, just like you were talking about where there's not a lot going on, some of these academics would do their best work walking, and it's something that Darwin uses to great effect, I think, later on in his life. But Fox had actually gotten him into being able to meet Henslow, and it was like you had certain times to go talk to professors.
Yeah.
And Darwin is able to go in and talk to him and get his attention enough that Henslow would then invite him on these walks where they would walk around campus and they would throw these ideas back and forth. But Darwin had to have something pretty special to get the attention of a botanist.
Yeah.
Because, again, he isn't classically trained in any of these things. He likes to collect beetles. So maybe there was a little of an association there.
Well, at the same time, it's got to be a combination of, the passion that he displayed and the interest that he displayed. Also, at the same time, if you're a botanist, I mean, at that time, if there aren't probably that many botanists around, people just studying plants, there's probably not a big requirement for it in society. So people that are into these more niche sciences of the time have also got to be in a very select, small group of people, and are probably just very interested in people that have a similar or adjacent interest in the natural world and just different aspects of it. And you meet someone like that and you're like, fuck, this person, doesn't think I'm weird. This person thinks I'm interesting. I have a lot in common with them. And so it probably is much easier to develop a kinship like that when you're around more like-minded people, even if it's not the exact same.
If you're not on like the academic levels.
Yeah, exactly. And he's already there from, a more well-to-do family. He obviously gained some education when he was going to Edinburgh. And as he goes to this, more clergy-centric training ground of Christ College, he ends up graduating 10th out of 178. So even though he kind of disregarded some of the clergy-esque studies, he was still able to do well enough that graduated in the top, what would that be, 5%, 10, between 5 and 10% of his class, and actually stayed. He graduated in January, I think, 1831. He ends up staying at Cambridge for like another 6 months, basically just because of all the resources he has there. He has Henslow there that he's able to communicate with. He has their facilities, their libraries, their collections. They probably have a museum somewhere in Cambridge at the main university. Yeah. So he's like, I maybe don't really know where I'm going to go from here, because technically he's going to have to, if he's listening to his father, he's going to have to be a clergyman and try to find a job that is more in that direction. So he stays at Cambridge for another 6 months, just studying shit. And in August of 1831, He ends up going on a geological study up in, or I guess not up in, but in Wales, right?
It's on the next board.
Okay. So,
One of the things that kind of leads him down this road is he gets a hold of a book, and I'm sure Henslow probably handed this off to him, but it's called Paley's. Names of books back then are the most annoying shit in the world.
longest fucking titles. It
Yes.
told you exactly what names of books now are meant to grab your attention and be like, ooh, what is that about? It's a little bit of mystery. These are like, no, you're gonna know exactly what you're fucking getting with this.
Yeah, keep this in mind while I say this. Paley's Natural Theology or Evidences of the Existence and Attributes of the Deity, Divine Design in Nature. So, again, a mouthful of a title, but to break it down and to really think about it, divine design is going to be how nature would have been created by a divine creator, by God. And so you start to see a little bit of we're getting into the naturalists and like how things are going, but at the same time, we're still starting from a point of someone had to have created everything that you see around you.
And then gave it the ability to evolve. That had to be part of the intelligent design of it, is that this species or this thing that I made would have to eventually change over time.
Yeah. So he's coming up for a geology course with a guy named Adam Sedgwick, and he travels with a group of his kind of college buddies to a place called Tenerife in the Canary Islands, and they study the natural history that are in the tropics, which, again, if you're coming from England and you show up in the tropics, it's like, oh, God. This is a completely different world. Like, your natural history can't be the same as ours just based on the climate alone.
Where are the Canary Islands located?
They are, it's weird because we have Micronesia in the Pacific, and it's called like Macronesia.
Okay.
So I believe it's probably down around Spain somewhere, maybe.
Okay.
But after that, he actually gets invited, or an invite from Sedgwick, the guy that he's about to take the geology class from, to go map strata in Wales. So that's what you were talking about, was he was headed with the professor for the class that he was trying to get ready for to just go map strata. Strata. I don't know why I fucked that word up.
Oh, it's off the coast of Africa, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So a ways.
Off the coast of like Western Saharan Morocco.
Huh. Interesting. After he gets back, he actually finds a letter that Henslow sends him and suggests that he go on a coastal mapping voyage of South America on the HMS Beagle as a naturalist. So, again, he doesn't even have a degree. It's just something that he's shown an interest in, and Henslow believes enough in his mind that he has the skill set to go be a naturalist on what isn't considered the most important mission in the world.
Does he not have the degree because he wasn't allowed to get the degree? I feel like if his father would have just out of the gate been like, hey, go study what you want at Edinburgh or at Cambridge or whatever, and had Darwin been able to choose his field of study, I feel like he would have had the piece of paper that said he was an expert. He was the closest you could get to a naturalist in a couple different fields. And that's the thing too, is he studied a whole bunch of different ones. He wasn't just centered on one. He was kind of being more well-rounded. But yeah, I think he was about as much of a naturalist as you could be, just without having that document saying that you basically giving you the official title. The guy that was actually going to be the captain of the HMS Beagle, I love the fucking name of this ship, Captain Robert Fitzroy. And Darwin is 22 at this time. Still young as shit. And like, you're thinking like this is still like a kid.
Yeah.
You have Fitzroy, who's the captain of this 2-year journey to map the coast of South America. He's like 26 years old.
Well, I forgot how Fitzroy became the captain, but I believe the Beagle had gone out on its first mission. Oh, yeah, that's what it was. The Beagle got out on its first like voyage, and the actual captain got like stir crazy. He got cabin fever, and ended up dispatching himself. And Robert was the next one to step up and take the captainship.
The first mate.
First mate, yeah, as that age of a man who wasn't expected to be a captain. and the voyage went so well that they just left Robert in charge.
Makes sense.
And Robert was actually the guy that had put out the kind of want ad, if you will, saying that he is willing to basically bunk up, give half of his captain's suite to a naturalist as long as they are in it for the right reasons. And I believe the term he actually used was gentlemen.
Yeah. So Robert Fitzroy, being a gentleman himself, of course, you have to be one if you're going to be a captain. It's like, fuck, I'm going to be gone for 2 years. I got to have someone to talk to that's kind of on my level, or at least has some type of commonality with me, because you're also going out and you don't have a ship full of the most well-educated men,
No.
or else they wouldn't be working, scrubbing the fucking decks and everything like that on the ship. So he wants basically someone that's able to be his intellectual equal, to basically not go stir crazy and fucking pull a previous captain and off himself. So he puts out the ad, and Henslow, being the one that, I'm sure it wasn't just to Henslow, but he picks up wind on it and is basically like, hey, Darwin, this guy needs a naturalist. I put your name in for it. You need to go and interview with him to make sure that you guys are going to get along and that you're going to get the job.
You're going to be together for 2 years in the same bunk.
You're going to be together for a planned 2 years. So he goes and meets with Fitzroy, and initially the meeting didn't go very well. And I think it was during the same meeting that all of a sudden during their conversation, he starts to warm up to him. And by the end of it, he's able to get the offer. But once he gets the offer, he then has to go and actually present this proposal to the person who's really going to be in charge, if he can go or not. And that's going to be another Robert, big Rob Darwin, Doc Darwin, to see if he can do this. And he's not happy about it. He thinks that it's going to be a waste of time. It's a waste of resources. A gentleman wouldn't go out and do this. It's not a real profession, yada, yada, yada. So he tells Charles, he's like, if you can get one person that I believe has, I'm trying to think what the term he used. Basically someone that I recognize as having common sense and is an educated person.
Above reproach.
Yeah. Above reproach. To let me know that this is a good idea and you can convince them, and they come to me and they're like, yeah, you should let him do this. Well, we have a deal. So Charles goes to his uncle.
Josiah.
What? Josiah. And basically pitches him on this thing and basically sells Josiah on it. And Josiah looks at Robert and is like, listen, man, not only should you allow him to go on this, but you should fund his journey, his expedition, because this was not a paid naturalist gig. No. This was essentially a fucking internship on this boat to go and be a naturalist and basically a geologist, because mapping, you're going to find out, the topographical information about where you're trying to map, and you weren't going to get paid for it. So Josiah actually convinces Doc Darwin to fund his son's expedition for this 2-year period.
Which, there was a point in time, not to keep going back to the autobiography, but...
Well, I mean, I think it's a good resource. It's his fucking autobiography.
For as many... The fun thing about the autobiography was it actually wasn't supposed to be one. It was like he wanted to write down a history for his children to pass on to his grandchildren.
It was like his memoir, but like a private one. His journal, I think it was his journal or something like that.
Yeah, because he had said that he wishes that he could have had grandfather Erasmus's journal, probably because he saw Zoonomi and wanted to see what the thought process was behind it. So he just writes it as like memoirs to his family that have all these kind of funny little stories. But he does go to make it a point to say that even though his father was tough with him a lot of the times and ran him down and kind of said bad things, he said that he loved his father more than anyone, and he was the man that he had always looked up to more than anyone.
Also, fun fact about Big Doc Rob, this man was it plus 300?
I don't know, was he?
Big, you didn't see that part? He was huge.
Oh, because of his heart issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, this guy was a big dude. And I just thought that was funny that he was a doctor, and you have this gigantic, like, possibly, like, obese dude, and he's giving out, like, medical advice and everything. You're just like, well, I mean, I guess you're still alive, so... And at that point, too, wasn't that was a status symbol?
Yeah, size was a status symbol.
Yeah, be like, this guy's healthy as shit. This guy's eating good.
So he gets to go ahead from Doc Darwin And the voyage of the Beagle starts to get pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. Initially, this was going to be a 2-year voyage, but the Beagle would finally launch December 27th, 1831. Under Captain Bunkmate Robert Fitzroy. They're living together. Fitzroy told him that he almost wasn't chosen. And Darwin's like, why? What happened? And Fitzroy believed in something. It starts with an L. I don't remember what it was called. But he said that he believed that because of the shape of Darwin's nose, that he would be an untrustworthy individual.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the fuck the name of that
Laminaean or...
But it was about analyzing somebody's facial features and like facial structure, and that would somehow make you would be able to tell certain traits that they would possess if they were dishonest or if they were like,
But
336 pounds, 24 stone, 6'2", which around that time 6'2" was probably a giant of a man, but he's a big one. Yeah, 336 pounds.
Well, he probably
big Rob Darwin.
Yeah, it has so much weight, so he could lean on somebody to give surgery.
Yeah, that's true.
to hold him down. But him and Fitzroy, like I say, they're bunking up together. And just the weirdest reason to barely make it onto the ship, but he does make it onto the ship. The voyage ends up lasting 5 years instead of the 2 years that they had planned for.
Yeah, so the voyage itself, again, an expedition to chart the South American coastline. So they're heading straight over from England down to South America. They were going to make a few stops along the way, like a few of the islands. I think they were going to stop at the Canary Islands, but it ended up being an outbreak of cholera or some type of disease. So they're like, yeah, we're going to skip that. It began like 2 months off schedule, I think, due to some issues. But when he was 22, December 27th, 1831, that's when the Beagle leaves port. It does not return, lasts almost 5 years, and comes back October 1836. So, only 3 years longer than it was supposed to be. And they said from the actual time spent sailing and actually traveling, only a year and a half of it was actual sailing and traveling. They spent the other, 2.5 years, a little more than 2.5 years, actually either, on an island or on land or, basically what Darwin's job was going to be is the ship would get there to a section of the coastline. It would then send a boat ashore where Darwin, being a geologist, would then go basically just hog nuts and explore everything. Mm-hmm. At that point, the ship would then just sail down the coast slowly, having the cartographer, whoever it is, just mapping out the coastline. Then they would sail back up. They would pick them up, take them down a little further, drop them off. And it would just happen like this in piecemeal all the way down the coast while they were doing this. So they spent the majority of time definitely on land doing this exploration.
That was a good thing for Darwin.
Oh, 100%. Because
Darwin turns out to be very, very prone to seasickness.
Yes, like he would get like violently sick and never seemed to have gotten used to it. He said that because he was sleeping in a hammock.
Oh, that sucks.
It would never, and I guess in the same way that even if you're sleeping in a bed, the bed is still on the boat and the boat is still moving. But I guess if you're in a hammock, there's also more of a sway and an unnatural swing to it if you're in there. So, wasn't really conducive to his health. While he was also doing all these geological samples and mapping out all this stuff that he was actually hired for, he was constantly just looking for like the wildlife and plants and all that kind of stuff, and was putting together on all these stops this huge collection. And he collected so much stuff, anything and everything. You got to imagine, like, you're in a place that is completely foreign to you. You've never seen anything like this. You've only heard stories. And you don't know at any point in your life if you're going to get back here.
Yeah.
So you're grabbing everything. If you have a doubt about it, it's fucking going in the collection. Also, I don't know if I'm going to go ahead and survive this journey. Like, at any point, a storm could knock us out. Mm-hmm. Indigenous peoples could possibly attack us or kill us. The Spanish might get pissed off if they see us and we're not on good terms with them. And again, HMS Beagle, not a big ship. They said that it was on the smaller side. It was a schooner or a sloop, or not a sloop because that's a one that goes upriver. But it was on the smaller side of sailing ships. It wasn't a war vessel or anything like that. And because he knew that that could potentially happen where they were lost at sea or something like that, he would write in his journals. He filled out tons of journals during this. He notated everything. Again, there's so much time here. He's not going to remember a lot of stuff, so he has to make as detailed notes as he can. And he is periodically sending these journals and all these specimens and collections back to England and back to Henslow. And I was trying to figure this out. For some reason, this was throwing me off. I'm like, well, if they're sailing all the way across the Atlantic and they're in South America, it's like, what? How the fuck are they sending stuff back? Like, it's not the postal service. You can't just drop it off in South America and be like, hey, can you make sure this gets back? It needs to go to England. Do you know where that is? But apparently the British, colonial power was so vast.
Oh, yeah.
And they had so many ships sailing the seas at any given time that they were constantly meeting up with other British ships and everything. And he would be like, hey, you guys heading back to England? They're like, yeah, we're heading back. And he's like, mind if I throw like 5 extra barrels on your guys' ship with all these samples and make sure these books get to this Henslow guy? So as he's out sailing and doing all this, specimen collection, Henslow's getting these collections and journals and things like that, but he's never hearing back from Henslow. So he's like, fuck, is my stuff getting back there? So he has this constant worry the entire time he's on this voyage, if he's going to get back and any of his shit's going to be back there that he's been sending.
Well, and along with all of these specimens that he collects, the biggest thing I think that he collects is just all of this knowledge, because their first stop is in Cape Verde. And Darwin was taken to a volcanic rock cliff, and it had a white band in it that had seashells embedded in it.
Yeah, pretty high up.
So as he's running into these things, all of a sudden he sees that there's a fossil record that's on dry land, and he starts to kind of think, well, how would these have gotten onto dry land? Because these are seashells that
these are immobile creatures who can't walk onto land in any way, shape, or form. And it's elevated quite a bit out of the water. It's like when you go to a lake or a reservoir and you see they've drained it, like during the summer to irrigation water, and you can see the water line where it used to be. This is basically where a collection of, like you're saying, like crustacean and seashells are kept. And he's like, okay, well, this tells me that either the water level of the oceans are dropping, or that the level of this island that we're on is actually raising up. And I think he went with the correct one at the time, which was that the island was actually, it could have been a combination of both, I guess. But he came to the conclusion, he's like, well, obviously this used to be a much smaller island and used to be, this area was submerged.
Well, yeah, and along with this fossil record that he's seeing on dry land, there was a book. It's debatable whether he brought it or Fitzroy had given it to him, but it was called The Principles of Geography. And
Geology,
yeah. And it kind of started these thoughts in his head as he was reading it and seeing it, that there is a propensity for land to shift up and down. And we're talking about a time when the word tectonic plates isn't even in the nutsack of somebody that's alive yet. We have no idea how earthquakes happen. It's still probably the divine that does it. You don't understand that as tectonic plates jam into each other, that's when mountains raise and these different things. So he's trying to figure it out from having only information that are just theories.
Yeah.
There's nothing really from it. Once they reached Brazil, Darwin experienced tropical forests that he had been learning about from all of his botanist friends. And, again, this is a world that he's only ever heard about and studied. And to be in a tropical forest from England, I'm sure that's like the biggest culture shock that you could ever have. One of the things that happened in Brazil that was kind of odd and interesting, it shows a little bit of Fitzroy and a little bit of Darwin. They didn't see eye to eye on the slavery that was powering the area. And at one point in time, they were sitting down in their bunks at night, and Fitzroy was praising slavery. Darwin, being anti-slavery, goes, well, don't you think that's wrong? And Fitzroy fires back at him and says, I was on a plantation with the owner, and I asked him that exact same question, and he told me that the slaves would rather be enslaved than free. And I asked him how he knew that, and he called the slaves over, and he asked them if they would rather be free or continue to be there and be slaves, and every single one of the slaves said that they would be there. Darwin's quick mind immediately snaps back and he goes, well, do you think that the answer would have changed had they not been in the presence of their owner?
The most common sense.
Yeah.
And the most sensible conclusion you can come to.
Fitzroy got so pissed off that he kicked.
That's the variation of do I look fat in these jeans?
Yeah, it's a loaded question. Fitzroy got so angry that he actually kicked him out of the bunk, and Darwin thought that he was going to be escorted off the ship and sent home because he had pissed off Fitzroy so bad. So he gets kicked out of the bunkhouse, but he had made enough of an impression on the rest of the guys on the ship that the guys that were working in the armory told him that he could come down and stay with them. So he goes and bunks up with them. A few hours later, Fitzroy actually sends one of the other lieutenants on the ship to go apologize to him on behalf of Fitzroy and ask him to come back and stay in the same bunk with him again. So it was like Darwin had this aura about him that people just kind of wanted to be around him. And I think it goes to a lot of what you were saying earlier with him in Henslow.
Yeah.
Whereas even though you're not doing the same thing, there's just a certain desire that you have to be with somebody that's on kind of like the same intellectual plane. And I think that Fitzroy probably had wanted a situation like that. Once they landed in Patagonia, Darwin discovered, this blows me away, he discovered unfossilized bones of large extinct mammals next to fossilized seashells.
That was in Buenos Aires, right? In Argentina?
I thought it was in Patagonia.
I think Patagonia... Okay, so Patagonia would be considered...
South America.
It is, but it's not still a thing, right?
It is. I think it is.
The region is known as Patagonia, but there's nothing... Okay, we're looking this up.
Oh, I think I know what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, and I want to say that Buenos Aires is part of what they considered Patagonia at the time. Because I did have that information where he found the fossils of a huge extinct mammal that was actually found there. And it turns out, was it a giant sloth?
Yeah, he found these just massive sloths. And the odd thing about all this is while it was around other fossilized things in these seashells, these bones had been recently left there for long enough to where they hadn't fossilized yet.
So Patagonia is a region that covers approximately about a third of the country of Argentina.
Oh,
Yeah,
no
so
way.
it's a region in Argentina.
Wild. Seems like a pretty big find, though, if you're finding bones of extinct mammals that you can't find anywhere else, but the bones haven't fossilized yet. So this would have to be a pretty recent extinction. When you're seeing that, but you're also seeing later on when they start to classify things, this plays kind of big into his theory. He's finding these giant extinct sloths, but there's still other smaller forms of these sloths that have survived.
Yeah.
So is it more of an adaptation? Is it the fact that the food chain can't support a larger mammal, but it can still support these smaller mammals? His interior studies, just like you were talking about, he was sending these samples back, he was sending these journals back, and like you said, you use the word barrel. Any sort of specimen nowadays that would be found would be put in like a hermetically sealed bag and probably packed with ice.
Cataloged meticulously, put in its own, section. This was literally just him like piling shit into a barrel. And then at the same time, so I was kind of just thinking of the process, because once he gets back, so much time is dedicated to the cataloging and information of his collections. And thinking about that from the aspect of, okay, he might be trying to put tags on something, or maybe a numerical system where he's writing in the journal, 1 is this, or I think this is where this is from, whatnot. But can you imagine Henslow just popping the top off of one of these barrels, and it's literally just looks like a mishmash of just rocks and shit, and he's looking down there and he's like, I got no fucking clue what to do with any of this. He's like, Darwin's gonna have to wait till he gets back and then just go through all of this to try to make sense of what this stuff is.
Well, and sorry, as you're one more.
You okay there?
Yeah. As you're going through and classifying these things, you're breaking them down by their kingdom, their phylum, their genus, their species, and trying to get them down as exact as you possibly can to be able to put them in these collections.
And basing it off of only the species that have been identified to you at the time.
Yeah, so then you have to go through and compare, do we know of this animal before? Is this a new find? If this is a new find, is this a different, same species, but a different kind of formation of this animal? One of the other things that I found just completely interesting was when they were down there, he would go on interior studies. So not just everywhere around the region, but he would actually travel inland to be able to look at some of these places.
He's a real river rat. Mm-hmm. He would take these trips with the, what did he call them?
Gauchos.
Gauchos, fuck
Yep.
yeah. He would go upriver with these gauchos into areas that had probably been explored by the Spanish, shit like that. But he was a guy going into these indigenous tribes' territories and basically like talking and communicating and interacting with these people. And isn't this where he kind of develops the theory for the human side of evolution? Because aside from, you know, despite having the abolitionist views and everything like that, he didn't believe that slavery should be a thing. But he still, due to the time and just the thought process of the time, that there were not different species, but different levels of human, with some being the more high and advanced like he was, and then you have the ones that he's now discovering, you know, before he just would meet slaves and things like that. So he saw examples of what he would consider people that were enslaved that would be a lower class, and now he's seeing people that are even what he would consider lower than that. So he's looking at this and he's like, how are these the same thing? Like, how are we the same thing here? There's something to this. Like,
Well,
why wouldn't we all, if we're all humans and we all came from the same Adam and Eve creationist type shit, at what point did you go from Adam and Eve down and we were going up on this trajectory? Like, shouldn't we have all kind of rise to at least somewhere along the same lines?
Yeah, and so much of that, he was doing kind of anthropological studies because as he was communicating with these tribesmen and these gauchos down there, he's finding out that they do a lot of the same things in just a more rudimentary way that they do back in England. And that kind of opens the door to being like, well, if we've never met, but we do things kind of the same, we have burial, we have these ceremonies. It's not religion like we would traditionally know it. You guys also praise God in your own, I mean, at that point, they've all
Your
been taken
god
over
or
the Spanish.
your multiple gods
Yeah,
or whatever it is. You guys have some type of something you've deified. Yeah.
So he can kind of start to see that there are these connections to where all humans just might be interrelated, because if you can be a world away and still have the same customs, there has to be something to it. While they're in Chile, he gets to experience an earthquake for the first time. Probably has to be one of the scarier things that you can deal with, because I don't know. Does England get earthquakes?
I don't know. It depends on where there's like active fault lines and everything. But as a geologist, you've heard tale of the quaking of the earth. But until you feel it for yourself, and he's just like, there has to be a mix of like, oh shit, oh God, this is fucking awesome. I'm getting to experience this. Like, it's scary, but like also like it's scary when it's happening. But after it happens, he's like, oh shit, that's what that was. I've heard of what that was.
Oh, and to go along with it, the luck that this is, because it provides him all of the examples of the land being raised. There was I don't remember if they said a kelp bed or some kind of a seabed that was covered with seashells and all these ocean plants that was actually not getting water anymore.
Yeah.
Because the tectonic plates had shifted and the earth had risen enough to where the water couldn't come in and cover those fields anymore.
I mean, it only has to raise it a few inches. Technically, if water's barely getting to it, it raises it a few inches, and you now have evidence that this was previously. You either have evidence of the earth being raised, and then he made the connection. So if he ever had a question of, like, did the water go down or did the earth go up? You're looking at that, and he's like, well, earthquake just happened. And then somewhere closer along the journey, he sees this landmass that's been shifted, and he's like, that's how it happens.
Well, and that's huge, too, because as they're going and climbing the Andes Mountains, he's seeing fossilized seashells in the mountains. And if you just got the idea of seeing the raised, actual, like, still fresh beds that are coming out of the water.
It's only been raised a little bit.
Yeah.
And now you're like, look how fucking far away from the water and how high up we are.
Yeah, it would just absolutely blow your mind to be able to see that in real life for the first hand. And there again, that's where all of these writings are going in these notebooks, and he's just filling these things with all of these ideas that are starting to form theories in his head that don't necessarily go against everything that he knows now, because even though at this point I think he was probably maybe leaning more towards God may have not had a hand on a lot of this stuff. He had read about transmutation, he'd seen other things like that. But now he's seen it, and the connection's becoming further and further away of, oh, I can explain this without throwing God in it now. So maybe there is a little something to it.
Well, this next stop that we're going to talk about is going to kind of be if he's on that tipping point of he's like, I guess it could still be this, but it's looking like it's going to be this. The one that shoves him over the edge is going to be this next stop on our tour, but we need to make a stop in the bathroom before we continue. Okay. Oh my God, Adam. What is that up in the sky? It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's socials. Oh my God. It's faster than Instagram.
That's historically high pod on Instagram.
More powerful than X?
It's historically high, historically HI on X.
Able to leap tall threads in a single bound.
Back to historically high pod on Threads.
And, I mean, I guess there's still Gmail, right?
We got that too. That is historically high podcast at gmail.com.
All right, guys, back to the show. All right, so they leave kind of Buenos Aires, Argentina area, and instead of heading back for jolly old London, they actually start heading up the west coast of South America and get all the way up to Ecuador. And off the coast of Ecuador is where the Galapagos Islands are. And this is kind of where, when he looks back on it and starts actually putting the collection together once he gets back to England and is really studying this and talking to other people who are experts in these fields, when it clicks for him. But all of the legwork is pretty much done here in the Galapagos. They land on this island, and apparently it's what was considered a new landmass, which means it's still millions of years old, but it hasn't been around that long in relation. Well, how is it that old if the Earth is only 10,000? Adam, explain it to me.
Well, and the fact that when we figure all this out, like you were just walking around on the Galapagos Islands just thinking that this was an island that you had discovered. And then once they start doing the mapping and they look through the strata and the fossil record, they're like, well, this is 10,000 years. There's a lot of 10,000 years here. And they're like, okay, well, this is 4 million years old. What was the youngest island before? 8 million years old. It's like, oh, shit, this is the newest place. It's been here for 4 million years. How about that?
So the Galapagos it's a series of islands. It's, a couple larger, a couple smaller.
Yeah.
So they're traveling all over these different islands. And as they're traveling to these different locations, he's doing his thing. He's doing his Darwin thing, and he's studying all the local animals, all that kind of stuff.
Studying and eating.
Okay. So I paint this in a movie. So I see this scene where he's sitting there and they're at a table and he's just discussing. He's like, these turtles are amazing. These tortoises, the identifications on their shells are different from island to island. They've all turned into some type of different species. And as the camera pans back, there's a fucking tortoise upside down in the middle of the table, and he's just eating. He's like, and they're fucking delicious. So they eat a shit ton of these tortoises from these islands, but in between all the tortoise slaughter, he's studying these birds and these finches on the island, and he's starting to notice through and he gets much better at sketching.
Yeah.
He gets much better at sketching because in all these sketches, he's kind of sketching these birds. He's going back, he's making comparison. He's like, man, these are all kind of the same type of bird, but there's differences in like their beaks and everything, just from island to island. And so he's watching these birds and, doing all his research shit. And he's seeing this bird actually eats these cactuses, has to poke through the skin of these cactuses to get to what it's eating inside. On this other island, these birds have to get into these certain types of fruits, and they're softer foods, but they have to eat more of them. And their beaks have evolved or have differences that are tailored to what they're able to eat. So on the fruit island, the beaks were like broader and a little wider. On the cactus island, they were more pointed and a little bit like hardier to where they could get through.
Needle shaped.
Yeah, and then on another island, it was a little bit of a variation because this one ate something else.
Nuts. It ate nuts, so it had more of a cracking kind of beak.
Like a parrot type, almost, yeah. And then he starts noticing also with the tortoises, even on these different islands that are still within this pretty tightly knit island chain, the tortoises' shells are different. They either have different variations in the pattern, size, shape, more boxy, more flat. And this is literally happening within, it takes him a little while to travel and pack up, of course, but he's like, I just saw a different type of tortoise on this other island that I can still see maybe in the distance, and this one's different, but they don't have any of these there. We would have eaten them.
And I shit you not, he said, this tortoise tastes different from the tortoise on the last island. Why is that?
Did he really say that?
Yeah. He could tell the difference in the taste of the meat of the tortoises and wondered how it was possible.
Is this a chicken turkey type thing?
I don't know. I don't know if it was more succulent. I don't know if it was darker.
Which gamier.
To go along with all of this, a lot of these just ties in a way that has absolutely nothing to do with this, sort of. But all of the foliage on these islands is still kind of similar. Like, you're able to find the same trees on these islands. And to go along with the taste of food, if you eat a deer that has mainly like a grass diet or anything like that, it's going to taste one way. If you eat a farm-raised deer that's feeding on pellets or anything like that, it's going to taste different.
There's going to be more marbling.
Yes.
Like just how grass-fed, grain-fed, yeah.
So even though they're still kind of eating the same foliage, their diets could be dictating the difference in taste.
On this island, this type of foliage is the predominant foliage, which supplies only enough food for this on this island. Just he's seeing subtle variations that are necessary when he puts it all together for the survival of these species. So this is kind of the reason I think most of this stuff happens in the Galapagos and really clicks for him is if he figures something out and he catalogs a specimen and then they sail and 6 months later he comes across something else and he's like, this kind of looks familiar, but I can't. What if that specimen is already sent to England?
Yeah.
And he's not able to make the comparisons and do side by sides. And he's like, fuck. He's like, I had something in that journal, but I sent it back, 6 months ago. On the Galapagos, he's seeing it in such a condensed time frame all in front of him that he can remember what the fucking other turtle tasted like.
Yeah.
This isn't where he's waiting a long period of time being like, you know what, this fried chicken from this place tastes different from this. Like, he could remember because it doesn't all just taste like fried chicken. He's like, I know exactly what type of turtle this is. So not only does he have all the samples to compare, and also they're killing these animals, not just to eat, but he's also getting samples of the birds and everything like that to then study their skeletal structures and their beaks and all that shit. And so he's able to just like set these side by side and be like, oh shit, like I can see it happening right in front of my eyes. He knows exactly what they're eating and it's all happening. It's a flip book. Instead of reading a book and then, slowly turning the page, he's seeing the activity that's happening right there.
There was also a time, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's just an incredible story, that on one of the islands in the Galapagos, he was shooting birds. And that night, after he had sketched everything that he had shot and he had put them all into his journals, he had to eat. So he started cooking up the birds that he had shot. And there was one that he had only been able to shoot one of and had only identified. It was the only identified that he had on the entire island. And he didn't realize it, and he accidentally cooked that one. And so he saved, like halfway through the meal, he realized what he did, that he cooked the only one that he didn't
digging
have.
the shit out of the trash. He's like, where's the beak? Where's the fucking head?
He found the bones and everything like that. And there were like feathers that he had put in there with it too. But
He's sitting there at his desk trying to like put stuff, like poke the feathers back in and be like, God damn it.
And I gotta wonder if in his journals, did he have like a description of the taste of the bird? Was there like a recipe?
I guess so. There's going to be a story when he gets back, but he seems like a very meticulous note taker. And so I think after that, he probably was just like, well, can't let this shit go to waste. And he pops it on. He's like slightly dry with an earthy fin. Like, it has to do the details. None of the other birds. And all the other birds, if he's eating other birds, he's like, well, I have recipe information for all these other birds here, so I might as well add this one to the list. After they end up leaving, unless there's anything else you want to touch on the Galapagos.
I don't think so. The Galapagos are kind of important to me because it's sad to say because this was fourth grade, but this was like one of the first things that I kind of really latched onto in school. And I don't know if things would have been different if I would have had different desires for college, but I love the Galapagos Islands. In high school, one of the AP classes that I took was AP Environmental Science. There was just something about nature and something about the study of all this stuff that just absolutely captured me. And I mean, he had these same interests, but I think this has to be the beginning of probably the coolest feeling that anybody could have. And the most I can relate it to is gambling, because
When he like this is him starting to go figure out he's on a run.
Yeah,
He gets on
well,
a heater.
it's that, but when you gamble, there's nothing that feels like winning a bet. There's nothing that feels like that number popping up on the roulette wheel. And it's like, I knew it. I placed this bet. I was correct. I am God. I know everything in the world. And it's a joy that he's starting to set these pieces in place for later on down the line, when he actually starts going back and doing research and doing these experiments to prove these theories. That I'm so jealous to know the level of like sketching these things out and trying to figure out natural selection. And then you go back and you put it into practice and you see it happen. You're just like, I was right. I was right.
Yeah.
I've been right for 5 years. I didn't even know.
I see this whole journey as he is when you put a puzzle together. So you put all the pieces out and everything, and then sometimes you find a couple pieces really quick in a row that all fit together into like a square that you put like 5 or 6 pieces, and bam, 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 and you're not looking a lot. That was the Galapagos for him. He found those pieces, boom, boom, boom. And the rest of the journey is him just putting in a piece here and then having to study something in a piece here. So then when he gets back, he then has the puzzle almost complete. And then he has all the pieces laid out in front of him. All of them are face up, but all of a sudden it's all making sense. And he's just bum, 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 putting them all into place.
He's got all the edges. He just has to fill in the middle.
Exactly. The next stop they make after they leave the Galapagos Island, depleted of turtles, they go to Australia, where he is completely fascinated by the kangaroo and the platypus. And he's looking at these things and he's like, I don't feel like these were built by the same person. Like both animals being built by like somebody started a project and then stopped, and then someone else was brought in being like, okay, you need to finish this up. And they're like, I don't know what the idea or thought process the other guy has. And he's like, and you have 30 seconds. And he's just like,
In the case of the platypus, the divine creator had a bunch of extra shit that he had made to put onto other animals.
He's like, I haven't found a place for this giant duck bill, but I was hoping to find a place for it. I have this beaver tail that's a little bit bigger and didn't work for the beaver. I got this poison spine.
Is it glands or a spine that they have?
It's a spine, and then it injects it. It's like behind its like back leg or flip or something like that. It's a spur.
Shit?
Yeah, it's just a bunch of leftovers, and then I have like a fucking marsupial body. Fucking good. Get out there.
It's the Frankenstein animals. The most perplexing thing in the world. They still fascinate me today. If I see a picture of a platypus, the next 10 minutes.
Maybe he's like, this is either going to go two ways. This thing's going to become extinct, or this thing is going to take over the entire planet.
Yeah, and it's one or the other. Somehow it's stayed in the middle. But then to think about a super engineered animal that more than likely probably had to develop its leg strength to be able to hop because it's crossing large distances to try to find food because it's out in the middle of fucking nowhere in Australia.
The most efficient way to cover.
Yeah, exactly. So there is a little bit of something there, but to know that those are the two animals that if you went down to Australia and had never heard of a kangaroo or a platypus and you saw, you'd be like, the fuck is that?
Well, because kangaroos are only in one place, it would be hard to get one back. I'm sure he actually probably had heard of a kangaroo because this was at a time when they did have
Penal
the colonial
colonies, yeah.
area in Australia and everything. So he probably heard story, but when he finally saw it, he had been like, yeah, we have nothing that I can compare that to. Like that thing is engineered just for this place.
And just like you were talking about earlier, there is a town, although Darwin never visited Darwin. There was a guy named Lieutenant John Lort Stokes that had named the city for his former Beagle shipmate in 1839. They pulled into the harbor. I don't know if he had had great interactions with Darwin, but this also goes to show you that I think he was a pretty likable guy, that they pull up into Darwin. He's like, we're just going to call this place Darwin. I boarded with this guy for a while. He's a pretty interesting dude. He actually showed me a platypus for the first time. We're going to call this place Darwin.
Do you think it was that he had a list of people and he was just running out of names because they had named so many fucking places? He's like, this one is, he's like, what was that fucking nerd's name?
Darwin was eighth on the list.
That cooked up all the turtles and was like catching all the birds. He's like, Darwin? He's like, yeah, Let's name it after that guy.
That guy fed us good. He was cool
He saw
enough.
birds there. He was like, "What was the name of that bird freak that we were sailing with?"
He's organizing his notes on this ride home back to England. So he circumnavigates the entire globe doing this whole trip.
Yeah, so they go from Australia, then they start heading essentially to head around. Is it
Good Hope.
Cape of Good Hope? So the Cape of Good Hope, they head around there, and they actually stop off in another British colony, which is South Africa. And at this point, I mean, it's toward they're getting ready to get home, so they've been gone for a while. He sent back a ton of shit, and I think it was Henslow. Hadn't Henslow kind of released some of the information that he found? It wasn't like groundbreaking stuff, but it was basically like this guy to the society, like the science society and that community and everything. It was huge. Like he's sending back all these samples. He's finding all of this new stuff. None of the talk was of his theories of evolution or, direct descent or whatever it was. This was just simply the excitement of like a scientist making like cool ass findings on a discovery around the world. Like how many of those guys maybe never got to do anything like that? Like it had to have been so exciting to get that.
Yeah.
So he starts to build up this buzz, and he's actually being well received for the stuff he's sending back, because to them, it's just stuff that's going to be going in museums and part of these collections that show the natural world. They're not thinking anything of the sort of like, this motherfucker's coming back to blow up our entire belief system. They're just looking at it from a standpoint of like, this guy's just finding cool shit, and we're going to be able to add it to our collections.
Well, yeah, one of the hot topics that he comes back with that he's kind of putting together at this time is something called the instability of species. And he writes in his journal about the instability of species after he saw all of these variations and adaptations within these tortoises and these finches, and there were some foxes somewhere along the way that he had seen that they had these adaptations to. But instability in species meaning there was a chance that all of these species, or that this one species derived from just one animal. Mm-hmm. But over time, through breeding, as plants grew higher and you couldn't get to it if you were a tortoise, so then your shell started to have a little peak in the back at one point in time, and all of the other tortoises that didn't have that peak couldn't reach the leaves, so they would die off of starvation. And then the reproducing mammals that were together there, tortoises are mammals, yeah?
Reptile?
I
I don't know.
But all of those that had adapted to this situation out of this potential just mutation are the ones that are then contributing to the gene pool. So as you get these tortoises that are going to these islands through some sort of float or system to be able to get there, once they're there, the breeding pairs are breeding that have the ability to eat the higher leaves. And so this instability in species is kind of showing that there's alterations that are being made through their genetics.
I was trying to figure out kind of a system on how to look at it, like a graph form. So basically what it kind of looks like is first it starts as kind of a pyramid scheme. You have this one common, proto ancestor at the top. Then it kind of branches off as you have genetic variations. But then at the same time as those genetic variations, they start to then come back.
Yep.
As evolution kicks in and like survivability and everything like that gets dialed into a more optimal version of that species. So it almost looks like a diamond shape. It goes out, and then all of a sudden as those species start to die off because of their genetic deficiencies or adaptable deficiencies, it all comes then back to a singular one, or a variation where it comes into a lesser amount of those species, all with their own kind of unique adaptation traits.
Well, and then it almost turns into a diamond again, because you're still going to go through weather pattern changes. You're going to go through droughts. You're going to go through times where all of the fruit that has dropped has already been eaten. So you have to have a genetic code to be able to last throughout the next drought.
And the only reason that diamond doesn't start flaring out again is because not enough time has passed. Where only at this point it's a cyclical thing. Not a cyclical, a diamond-esque? I don't know.
Yeah. They end up landing back. Oh, yeah, what you were talking about earlier. So without his knowledge of any of these letters that Darwin's sending back to Henslow, Henslow's taking these little excerpts from these letters, and he's taking them to something like, they're called scientific societies, and it's probably like the one that he was a part of in college, and then he'll be a part of a couple of them later.
Like, what do you think of Uranus? And they're like, I think it is a planet.
Perfect, yeah. There was something called the Athenaeum Journal. Athens, probably. Athena. Got to be somewhere in there.
Wasn't she God of Wisdom?
Could be, yeah. So all of these things are getting published in these journals, and just like you were alluding to earlier, if you don't have a whole lot to do, these journals are going out to enough people that care about it for entertainment purposes. They're starting to know the name of Charles Darwin. So by the time they get back, October 2nd, 1836, the Beagle lands in Cornwall. Darwin returns back home to Shrewsbury,
In Shropshire.
sees his family, spends a little time there, books it back to Cambridge because he has to start cataloging all of these animal specimens that he had sent back.
So this time frame over the next couple years feels like a fucking whirlwind for this guy. I was thinking about all the stuff he's bouncing back and forth and doing, and also at this time, cars aren't a thing, so travel is not very quick between these places. Carriages and shit. And so, the sending and receiving of all of this stuff, and also if he needs to travel here for a lecture or here to do this, he's just constantly on the move, and this is going to come into play big time here really fucking quick.
Oh, yeah.
So as soon as he gets back and he visits home, like you said, it's back to Cambridge after he basically pops in, drops his bags off, and he's like, hey, is everyone good? I'm good. Okay, I got to go. He's excited to go see all of his shit that he's been sending back. So he heads back to Cambridge to work on the collection. This ornithologist named John Gould basically is, he's pulling in experts in these fields to help him try to put together kind of a picture and classify all of these things and find out what they are. So he's studying with an ornithologist regarding the birds, and he's basically looking at all these drawings and hearing him describe what they look like and what they're doing. And the guy's like, well, these all sound like finches. And he's like, no, they were different because this one, like, look at my drawing. He's like, no, those are all considered finches. Like, I'm a fucking ornithologist. I know what I'm talking about. And so he's looking at all the beak variations. He's like, so these are all the same species of bird, technically. They're just different variants of these species. So all of a sudden, he sees this part of the puzzle. It starts to make that more clear. When he's 28, so he gets back and he's 27 years old. He spent 5 years, comes back, they said he came back like rougher a little bit, more manly.
Yeah, because he threw up the entire time he was on the boat.
That's true. And there were no women around, so he had to,
Yeah.
So when he's 28, March of 1837, he's like, fuck it, I got to be where the work's at. So he ends up moving to London to basically be around his science boys, because that's where the hub of all the scientific how-to-do of the day was going on. Moves to London, and as he's editing and publishing these reports on his collection, as he's finding these discoveries and putting, what each of these things is, he's getting publishers coming to him because he documented his journey on the Beagle, and people are like, you need to fucking write, start publishing a book about this. You need to get this information out there. So he also wants to do this book as part of his journal that he's putting together with these actual theories that he's starting to come up with. But he knows he also has to kind of play to the crowd and publish just the stuff that's not going to be controversial, and it's not going to challenge the actual thinking of the time. He tells his publisher and takes these unrealistic publishing deals of like days that he's going to have these books completed and just to get like the money to help fund it and everything like that. Because again, he's having to kind of fund himself during this. I don't know if Dad's still providing the funding, considering he's had to pay for an extra 3 years.
I'm sure Papa Darwin's got the dough.
That's true. And also his son's kind of famous, so he probably, he's trying to bring fame to the Darwin name.
Yeah, but
Dad's not going to think in the way that's going to end up happening.
No. But to go along with what you're talking about all this mapping and studying and all these books that he's planning on writing and all that, before he even moves to London, he actually he published his first papers on the slow rise of the South American continent, and he gives it to the Geological Society of London. That happened January 1837. By February, he was elected onto the Council of Geological Study.
He was a secretary, right?
Yeah. So we're celebrating this guy for On the Origin of Species, But his geological findings were so broad and so great that they just put him on the Council of Geological Study in England.
Yeah, I think he gets like before this, I kind of pegged him as like a one-trick pony. It's a fantastic fucking trick. Best trick ever. You'd want to see it. But at the same time, now finding out that like, oh shit, this is just what he keyed in on.
He's a 5-tool player.
Yeah.
He's just into everything.
So as he's trying to meet these deadlines and everything, he's basically just burning himself the fuck out.
Yeah. So
And
bad.
burning the candle at both ends. And it's starting to lead to some issues, and he starts to develop heart palpitations. And again, like I said, the time frame here is pretty condensed. So March is when he moves to London, and September 20th is when he goes to the doctor with these heart palpitation issues.
He had done this before. Prior to the Beagle leaving, he had noticed these heart palpitations. He had had some pains in his chest. And for fear of missing out on the Beagle voyage, he just doesn't go to the doctor because he doesn't want to be ruled ineligible. But he believed that there was something seriously wrong with him even before he left. And so to come back and to get these palpitations again and to be plunged into just sickness and poor health, he's probably got to believe that he was right the first time.
His health problems are going to plague him and make things difficult for the remainder of his life. And there's been some speculation because he was spending time, going upriver and being in South America, that he might have picked something up in South America during part of the journey. And so when he got sick, they said when he got sick with just minor stuff, it made him very sick.
Yeah, I can
And
see
so
that.
it was kind of already taxing on his immune system. As he, is dealing with these heart issues, he goes to the doctor, and the doctor's like, listen, you need to cut the shit out now. You need to fucking full stop, and you need to go live in the country for a little while without any stress. You need to. You're fucking 28 years old, and you're
Can't be having
these-
heart issues already.
Yeah, no shit. You can't be done with heart issues at this point. To him, he's just so fucking excited.
Yeah.
He's a celebrity at this point. He's trying to get, he is so famous in all these different circles. He's having to play in all these different circles while at the same time trying to do his own thing on the side. And the worst thing to him that you could tell him is that he has to stop or he's going to kill himself. And then what's going to happen to all of this? So the hardest thing for him, I think, was to realize, okay, I know I need to get to this stuff, but if I keep trying to get to this stuff, I'm never going to be able to get to this stuff because I'm going to be in the fucking ground.
And whoever reads my journals is going to think I'm some just sick pervert.
Yeah. Oh, if they get read at all.
Yeah.
At any point, are they going to be understood? Is it going to be by a person who's just going to fucking trash them because they don't believe in what I'm saying?
Because they didn't see it.
Exactly. So he ends up going back home, I think, and basically is nursed back to health by his older cousin, Emma.
Emma Wedgwood from his mother's side.
And him and Emma, they kind of struck up a rapport and everything. It was just a simple friendship, a simple familial relationship when it first started. But she was kind of one of the people that was more like-minded, like him, and wanted to hear about like all of his stories and like all of his theories. And he felt like he could really kind of open up about some of the more out there stuff with her, and she wasn't dismissive of it. She may not have understood it or anything, but they got along really well, and that kind of stuck with him. Stuck with him enough that him and cousin Emma, was it 2 years later?
1839.
Yeah, so 1839, he actually marries cousin Emma, and they liked to get down because they actually had 10 kids, I think, and 7 of them made it to adulthood.
I thought it was 9, but once you get past 5, it's really
who's
just a
counting?
number. Yeah. Before they got married, this is another reason that I love Darwin, is because he made a T-chart and he put marry and don't marry on the 2 sides, and his top 2 reasons for marry were lifelong friendship and
Better than a dog, or longer lasting than a dog.
The second one was companionship that knows no bounds more than a dog.
Yeah, that's right.
And then on the don't marry side, it was more money for books and
Less time.
less time.
Mm-hmm.
So
He ends up leaning on that side. Again, as he's, working here and everything, while he's not even when he's on vacation, he's not on vacation because he starts to have this theory about like earthworms. He's always fucking working, like even when he's supposed to be taking it easy. So he's out in the garden, he's looking at these earthworms, and he's determining essentially like the role of earthworms in essentially aerating soil and all this kind of stuff, but also how earthworms exist on like other continents that are able to operate in it's like a common creature like an ant or something like that. So he's
Yeah.
like there obviously has to be some type of adaptive nature to earthworms. So he's picking up these little fucking breadcrumbs just to add to the fucking loaf that he's already making. He actually goes and he's rested up at this point. September 20th, he's good to go. November 1st, he gives a geological society speech.
Which year?
That was November 1st, 1837.
Oh, okay.
And so even his time off, it's fucking short-lived because he's right back to it. Constantly working on his journal this entire time. He's basically kind of living two different lives. He's living the public life of Charles Darwin, the naturalist, who's talking about all of these things that are established, recognized sciences, and none of his opinions are controversial. They're almost like elaborations on already discovered stuff or partially new theories and discoveries, but people are accepting them because they don't challenge any type of like religious theory.
Well, and during this time in his notebooks, he's hitting on these topics of the possibility of one species changing into another, which is the transmutation theory kind of on steroids. He starts to sketch out the evolutionary tree, and that is the one that has the branching descent on it. So, one tree trunk, you go up a level, branches off, continues up, branches,
And then
until
some of
you
those
get to a
branches
human.
branch off.
Yeah. So we see this theory of this singular species that's just climbing this evolutionary tree towards humanity. Kind of cool. Within the same week that him and Emma actually got married, he was made a fellow into something called the Royal Society. Mm-hmm. And the Royal Society was a pretty big deal to get into because once you're in the Royal Society, you have access to all of these other minds and all of these other resources as far as like libraries that you can go into. You're going to these common meeting places to where you can really shake it up with a bunch of other luminaries and people that are studying these different things. And that's great for him because he has these theories, but at the same time, he's open to taking in as much information about everything that he possibly can.
Yeah, he's trying to fill in the gaps of things he doesn't know. He goes even as far as going to like cattle breeders and starts to kind of explore the theory of like selective breeding. So he's asking these guys, he's like, okay, so how do you go about picking out who you are going to determine like which bull you're going to breed? And they're like, oh, well, we look for this and this and this. And then we find that that produces, the more desirable. So he's like, oh, shit. He's like, okay, so this is a selective form of evolution that we're trying to force through. He then goes to, I think, a zoo in March of 1838, and he's watching this orangutan. And he's looking at it, and he's like, this thing's just kind of acting like a kid. It's just showing and displaying, like, curious, like, childlike behavior. And he's like, no other animal kind of displays that, and this is a very human-esque or human species-esque type of behavior. So he's just picking up little things here and there to try to figure out how to go about this stuff. He ends up getting put down again in that year, in 38, in June, due to stomach issues. He has headaches, and then, like, basically his heart palpitations and, like, strain on his heart. So before he even, gets married, he's already been out of this for 2 times. The second time that he gets knocked out, he again goes on a little walkabout, or what did Teddy call it? He went on his wandering years or something like that.
Yeah, I don't remember.
But Charles ends up heading up to Scotland and doing some geologizing, which I'm not sure if he was just like chilling out and relaxing and just saying he was doing something. He's basically all better in July of that year. And yeah, then he goes on to marry cousin Emma.
Which, I don't want to skate by that.
Huh?
I don't want to skate by that.
Well, we already discussed that it was cousin. I mentioned cousin Emma several times with the title of cousin Emma.
I'm just saying, for as brilliant as the guy was, and he understood how breeding worked, And he knew that interbreeding into the same family would cause some disruptions.
We don't know he knew that.
I think he probably did at this point. There's no way he didn't. But the heart wanted what the heart wanted, and the heart wanted Emma. Theory of natural selection kind of becomes like his number one hobby. It's not going to be what's going to be making him his money, because he has this idea that he can't really put together yet because he wants to spend some time on it. To his credit, he is or was the kind of guy that would take extra time because he wanted to come back to his work and look at it with kind of like untainted eyes. Like there's no bias, because he had removed himself far enough away from it that he could look at it and be like, that's shit. That's not good.
You got to think of the other way I look at it is, this is so new and so outside of like the common kind of belief structure, that if this has holes in it or places where people can poke and start to dig away at the theory, it's just going to dismiss it that much.
Oh, yeah.
He's taking the time, and because it is such a controversial thing, he does have trepidation about how much should I put out? Like, what can I do? But he's like, unless I can back all of this up with rational thought and scientific fact, I don't think I can really put any of it out. So I'm just going to go back to the lab and I'm going to keep working on this while at the same time being the Charles Darwin in society that everyone knows me as.
Yeah, and along with that, anytime new theories were presented, he said that if it was contradictory to what he had believed, he would make sure to write that down as soon as possible, because he felt that if he heard something that was more negative towards his theories, he would forget it faster. And then, depending on where these things fit into his theories, he would research out further. He started to selectively breed plants and different animals. He bred pigeons at one point to kind of try to figure out the artificial breeding side of it, to kind of explain what natural selection would be, just based upon like the traits that he sees desirable for different circumstances. Would nature also do the same thing?
Yeah.
And I think over that entire time, he spends 15 years doing this. And during that 15 years, he's publishing other works on geology, expert reports from all of the Beagle collection, like you were talking about. It's
having lots of sex pumping out those kids.
Yeah, everything. At one point in time, he wrote down in his journal that he thought his wife had become lazy because she hadn't been pregnant in a while. Just that much further into
Another funny thing that I forgot to mention with him and Emma is when they were kind of having the conversation about getting married, is Emma was still under the belief that there was an afterlife and God and all that kind of stuff. And at this point, Charles was like, I'm not so sure, because I think all of this has some type of scientific rhythm and rhyme to it. And because of this differing belief, she's like, well, if you believe that, then like when we die, we're not going to be in the afterlife together. And he's just kind of like, yeah, I guess so. And he's like, should we just table that one and still get married and just kind of figure that out when we're going to die? And she's like, yeah, we just won't want to talk about it that much. And so they end up just getting married anyway. Seems like a pretty big.
Yeah. Well, and even before that, we got to quit going back on this stuff, but it's just so funny. He goes and talks to Robert. He goes and talks to Papa Darwin about marrying his cousin Emma, and he asks how he would do it and if he thinks it's a good idea and all that kind of stuff. And he goes, well, I'm definitely going to share with her my theories on transmutation, kind of some of the stuff that I've told you guys. And his dad goes, do you want to marry her? And he goes, yeah. He goes, don't tell her.
You're not going to tell her shit about that.
Yeah. If you want this woman to love you and marry you, you're going to keep all those beliefs shoved way down.
Horses, hunting, that's what you should talk about. Rock collecting, beetles, maybe.
Yeah, that's as far as you need to go.
None of the crazy shit.
Kind of something that starts to form is he's sharing these new beliefs with his close colleagues. They questioned his denial of seeing kind of the beginning to each of these crops of species, as far as like, well, there wasn't number one, there was number one, and then they started branching off slowly, instead of being like there was one of every species and then they started moving.
Yeah, that's the kind of the branch off is, okay, I may have understood this incorrectly, but his theory of evolution is that it's like the single-celled organism became a multi-celled organism, and it all came from that. These guys are kind of not going back that far and willing to take that into consideration. What they're saying is hey, we think that all of these species were created as like there was just one finch made and there was one fish made and there was one, and then they all branched off. So instead of a tree that has everything branching off from one single source, they were like, no, 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 there's a tree for every species. And then from that tree, you branch off into all the variations of that.
Which,
Like all snakes came from one snake and
yeah,
then they evolved. One bug came from, whatever.
yeah, and this belief of divine creation that they still had, because while they're scientists and they're men of science, they're still backed by.
They still think there was a snap of the fingers and poof, that animal was there.
Yep.
And it wrote on the fucking ark.
Just somehow. Flood theory again came up in this, as far as people trying to dismiss some of the skeletons that he had found and some of the fossils were from the flood, and how those animals were the ones that didn't make it into the flood.
Oh my God. This reminds me, and it's completely off topic. I know we don't discuss this usually. Did you see the Candace Owen thing where she doesn't believe in dinosaurs?
No, it tracks, though.
Yeah. If someone came up to me and is like, I don't believe in dinosaurs, I don't know if I could carry on a conversation with that person. Not because dinosaurs aren't just fucking awesome, and like, why wouldn't you want to believe that there was giant lizards roaming the planet? But at the same time, to somehow think when people are like, no, the bones are fake and everything, I was like, what type of behind the scenes cabal is trying to pull one over with the fake dinosaur theory? Like, what is to gain by that? And it's such a all museums have dinosaur bones, so everyone's fucking in on it, and no one's come out and said it. Like, there's nothing to gain by something that fucking stupid.
As a child who grew up in the Mormon church, I was told on more than one occasion that the dinosaur fossils that we found were actually remnants from other Earths and other planets that had dinosaurs that God had brought into existence, and then used those chunks on the Earth, which would make a ton of sense.
This is like the place where they get sent in Deadpool and Wolverine.
Yeah.
Where it's just got all the pieces of all the other universes. Okay.
Which, until you get to the fact that they found the same kinds of dinosaurs on different continents, that would be pretty weird to be able to throw all that kind of stuff together and still make that happen. And you'd also have to admit that God had other planets that he just had dinosaurs living on that then went extinct, and he pulled those pieces out and shoved them in.
Just put your fucking tithe in at him.
Exactly. Yeah, just not a lot of great answers to it. The pressures of publishing his book on the structure, the structure and distribution of coral reefs, from his theory on the way that atolls became formations, kind of chased the family out of London. They had this cool house. It was called like the Macaw House. It was where the movers and shakers were happening. They were having a bunch of kids there, but somehow the pressures of these papers, which again, a huge mounting problem that he has to deal with, done by a guy who already has like a bad immune system and has heart palpitations. You could see how this much stress would probably make you want to go out to the country. Him and Emma both grew up in the country, so it was kind of something that they more knew of. They end up moving out of London to a place called the Down House in Kent, and this place is so cool. I listened to a podcast with the guy or maybe a couple years ago, that's the groundskeeper of the Down House. And they have restored the property to where the pictures of the time when they lived there, which I don't know what pictures were back then, but they have enough definition to where they can figure out which kinds of tulips were planted. And they've actually planted the same tulips in these beds.
So they've restored it to be as is at the time that Darwin was there.
Yeah.
It's fucking
but
cool.
All of these plants and all of these flowers that he was working with and experimenting on, trying to figure out stamen and pistil and sexual choice, basically.
Well, he also had the whole flower theory was that flowers evolved as well. It wasn't just, a theory of evolution about animals. Like, this leads into any living thing. So he's looking at these flowers and he's like, these flowers must have developed some type of coloration pattern that attracts more pollinator insects, or it has it's the pistil or whatever that has like the pollen on it, or has it more exposed to where they could get to it more. So he has these theories and he's like, it's not just fucking animals, it's these flowers, because I'm planting these and the bugs are going more after these and everything. So he's just like, anywhere he can be trying to do these tiny little experiments, he's doing them.
Yeah. And it goes on through everything. When they would have children, he would study these children and take notes on everything that they did, because there was a theory that there were certain muscles in the face that were solely created to generate emotional reactions. So like smile muscles, frown muscles, all that kind of thing. And whenever one of his friends would have a child, they would always send a letter to Emma, hey, we just had a child and all this. Darwin actually had a questionnaire that he had written up that he would have Emma send back with the letter asking the mother to watch the child and to fill out the questionnaire just to get like a larger case study on this kind of stuff. That was the lengths that he was going to, where he was sending these new mothers questionnaires to fill out about their children.
Someone has their second kid and they're like, don't tell Emma we've had another kid, because we'll get one of those weird ass fucking letters from her husband again.
And you see about in public, Charles like, wait a second, I thought you guys only had one kid. You only told us you had one kid. Well, how did that one develop?
Good news, I always carry a spare child questionnaire on me at all times. So in 1842, he starts to actually kind of put pen to paper and sketches out his first theory of natural selection after basically developing and kind of refining it for 3 years, just specifically on that natural selection portion. Basically, later in the year, that sketch had expanded from a sketch into a 230-page essay. So once he got started, he didn't fucking stop.
No, he had a lot to say about his hobby. While he's doing all this other stuff, he's got a lot to say about the hobby. November 1842, there was an anonymously published piece that was titled, one more time, Vestiges of the Natural History of Creation. It became a bestseller, and it brought a ton of interest to this theory of transmutation that's, again, just being pushed further down the field. And along with that, can probably see why this was posted anonymously, it brought a ton of controversy. Because scientists were dismissing it left and right, because, again, the science that's going on now is rooted in religion. Transmutation flies in the face of religion. So even these scientists are looking at it like, no, there's no way. You got to think Darwin's shitting himself at that point, right?
It's basically like the smoking companies are developing the non-smoking ads.
Yep.
Is what it is, yeah.
But along with that, this thing is a bestseller. Like, it's flying off the shelves. So there is this interest in this theory, if not among the scientists, but among the actual people that are reading these that aren't scientists.
I also think, too, going back, and I know this is something stupid to focus on, the names, how they're so long and detailed. Yeah. There had to be so many scientific papers developed and submitted and everything like that, that you couldn't just name it something like... So there was already a paper called Natural History of Creation, or The Vestiges of Creation, or something like that.
Yeah.
That had been named. So you had to be so specific, and they had to have just gotten longer, because we're going to get to the title of his book, and it's just so specific.
It's like they skipped the headline, and it's just the byline.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because I think the scientific papers, when you're submitting it, it has to be very clear what it's actually going to cover. Do you believe that it was written by Darwin?
No.
Okay.
No, I think they actually did find out who wrote it.
Okay.
And it was somebody that was fairly far away. I'm not sure. I'll look it up and see. 1851, sadness befalls the Darwin household. His favorite daughter, which kind of funny that he actually said he had a favorite daughter. Her name was Annie, and she fell ill and died. And the loss shook him deeply, as he was already probably pretty fragile, just based upon his health state and his mental state trying to get all this stuff done. He also believed it was a hereditary illness, so he almost felt like he bore a little bit of responsibility for what killed his daughter, which, again, isn't really going to work well. By 1853, his barnacle research had ended with the Royal Society's Royal Medal that cemented his reputation as a biologist.
Robert Chambers is who wrote The Vestiges.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was he?
He was a speculative natural history philosopher.
Okay. When talking about the barnacle research, he spent 8 years researching barnacles.
That's what, like, kind of, I don't understand how he could be looking into so many things.
Yeah.
And spending so much time researching each thing. But it also, it lends weight to it. The fact that, like, this, he tied up everything. He was looking at it from every fucking angle he could.
Well, the barnacles really helped with his theory of natural selection, because as they're going out on the Beagle and they're traveling in different waters, he notices certain barnacles that are still attached to the ship. He sees new barnacles, and those specimens that he's going through and studying, he's seeing these different muscular adaptations or the way that they filter water. And so he's seeing that there's certain species of barnacles that have these adaptations that are making them live longer and then breed and then pass on those same traits.
Or ones that are falling off because you're entering colder waters and
Yep.
they're not made for that climate. So he's like, okay, these ones are not meant to go here. This one's been hanging around. This one's hardy as fuck because this one's been with us for the longest time.
He said after 8 years of studying barnacles, he believed that there was nobody on the planet that hated barnacles more than he did.
I would believe that.
Yeah.
Well, we can also chalk 5 of those years of studying barnacles up to the voyage on the Beagle because I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure he started that barnacle research early.
Well, this was 1853, and it was 8 years, so he would have just been back
Yeah,
for
that's
a little
true.
while. So he gets this royal medal from the Royal Society. He has his legacy cemented as a biologist. Again, as a biologist, which this field of natural selection, yes, biology, by all accounts and all that, he's a part of the Geological Society. Now he's a biologist. Like, all of these things all the chickens are coming home to roost for all the different things he's
fucking
done.
feathers. He looks like a pimp. He's just got feathers in his fucking cap.
Yeah. 1854, he became a fellow of the Linnean Society. And the Linnean Society was a very big deal with academics. He gained access to all of its members again, and they actually had a postal library, so he could just go ahead and write from the down house as to what books he wanted from the library, and they would just send them to him.
That's such a weird concept to think that, and I guess it probably exists to some capacity today. I'm not sure what the modern iteration would be, that there were these different societies or clubs in these cities or towns that they all had access to like their own coveted information and everything. But like you were also like you had to be inducted into these different societies and then you got access to their resources.
They had to make sure that you were going to be a worthwhile contributor to the society.
Yeah. And do you think that was a big thing for once, at this point too, that you have Darwin? Like, yeah, Darwin's in our society. Well, he was the secretary of geology in our society. And it's just, and then you're looking for ways like the botany society is like, does this motherfucker know enough about plants for us to justify getting this guy into our society?
Yeah, and so much of the benefit of being in this Linnean Society and getting this postal library is just like you're talking about. He's not traveling to meet people anymore. They're not throwing these big fanciful parties because he knows that all of that stress and all of that pressure that they ran from is what makes him sick. Mm-hmm. And if he's living out in Kent and they're out in the middle of nowhere and he can just focus on his work, that's more time to do studies.
Yeah.
He said that he had a mirror in his office that faced the driveway so he could always see if anybody was coming up. He still had no problem scheduling meetings with people to come out and see him and kind of talk to him and pick his brain, but he didn't really travel back into society a whole lot anymore because he had to just be so bogged down by his daily life and research.
I wonder part of it too is that when Annie ended up dying, that he looked at it and was like, if she died and I had some type of contribution to this through my genetic line, he'd also had health issues before. That kind of puts it into perspective of, we could all go at any moment.
Yeah.
And at that point, when he's looking and he's like, I can either spend my time fucking hobnobbing and giving speeches and all this kind of stuff, or I can spend my time doing what really actually matters to me with the time I have left, because I could go at any minute. I need to advance this shit as fast as I possibly can. And June 28th, 1858, Darwin's infant son ends up dying of scarlet fever. And
What's scarlet fever?
I don't know.
Like your cheeks turn rosy and you get a fever?
I think maybe you just burn up so much that you turn red. And who knows how those things got their names.
I'm sure we'll figure it out. Somebody will tell us, just like they explained to us that consumption was from tuberculosis.
Yeah. At this point, too, I think this has another kind of spurring effect that all of a sudden now he has 2 examples of just life can be taken at any point, and he realizes that, his clock could go at any point, so he hurries his ass up, and in November of 1859, after 15 years of putting together this theory, his work finally culminates in what's kind of known as the origin of species, but it's actually the origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life.
It's got to be one of the longest book titles there's ever been.
It leaves no doubt about what this book is going to be discussing. Yeah. And he's nothing if not thorough. The book sold over 1,250 copies the day it went on sale. Now, compared to a New York Times bestseller, when one of these books comes out and it goes fucking crazy, when you can only print so many books,
yep.
Not only can you only print so many books, I don't know how much scientific journals or books are on the priority list for what should be being printed, as far as like, there's possibly newspapers and all this stuff. So to come out with 1,250 copies, that alone right there is kind of staggering. Like, how long did it take them from the time he finished to the time that was able to be produced? And then the fact that it sold that many the day that it went on sale. I mean, Charles Darwin had to be a name at that point. And once he kind of went back into the shadows and went to Kent, didn't really come out that much. That makes him kind of an why can't I say this?
Ignatius?
No,
enigmatic.
Why can't I pronounce this word? Enigmatic? Oh my God. I gotta take a drink. Enigmatic? Like an enigma.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know why I cannot pronounce that word. I apologize. Jesus. But I think it kind of made him almost not a legendary figure, but kind of mysterious. And when this finally came out, they're like, this guy's finally come out with, like, we've been waiting to hear what this guy was going to say, and he's come out with this book. The scientific community, not only them, but also all the people that... Can you imagine the people that picked this up thinking it was something different because of all the stuff he'd put out before was so towing the line and wasn't really groundbreaking? It was just better. But now all of a sudden he comes out with this book and it completely turns everything on its ass, or on its head, I guess. And it's not like just the people that know what's going to be in this book are buying it. It's all the people that have bought his stuff before, all of the clergy, all the church people that are reading this, and they're like, the fuck is this? And as this book is definitely going to do, it received mixed reviews. A bunch of his old colleagues that he had all these established relationships with basically dismissed it, and others went the other direction. They ran with the idea. This idea is not... It's not the first time this idea has been floated. Obviously, there was that paper that came out, that anonymous piece that came out. His grandfather had also had some information regarding, in that poetic fantasy or whatever it was about evolution. But this was the first time it came out and had seriousness to it, and also had all of the theories laid out on why this was the way things were.
And it had research. It had
all the backings.
Yeah.
It had what it was proposing, and then it was like, now I'm going to fucking show you why this is true.
Well, and he even still to this point in The Origin of Species actually holds up on some of it. He doesn't make the full leap and connection into humans, but at the same time, there's enough meat on the bone to know that that's the direction that he's headed. That was the two things that he kind of pulled from it. He had headers for the chapters on them. There was one on sexual selection, and then one taking this origin of species all the way up to being human or humanity. The book was so well received that it actually backsold on the first day, and they had to start on printing the second edition of it so fast because they had made all of these sales that they didn't have books for yet. But along those lines, it was... it's different to think about today, maybe, but it was translated into different languages. And how big is that when all of these theories in this sphere of influence is coming from England and coming from this belief of having, all the same language and all of the same subtleties in the speech, and to understand all of this scientific jargon that I listened to in the autobiography so many times and just did not know. He uses like actual like phylum name kind of
it's, yeah, what was the thing they always try to do? Species, genus, something, phylum.
Kingdom, phylum.
Yep.
And so you have other countries that are now seeing the best and the brightest that England has to offer on this whole new theory that may jive with some people in other countries, but it also could bring a lot of condemnation to them too.
Well, and here's the thing too, is there was somebody else that was kind of floating around this same theory and was doing research with, I can't remember the guy's name, but it got to a point as well where they were going to Darwin and they were like, hey, this other guy has a similar theory and everything, but you need to get yours out so you can be the guy that came out with it first. I don't think that other guy had taken it as far as Darwin had, or had the same, breadth of information that he had, but there was someone out there that was also kind of like going along the same route.
He was actually, I think, sending specimens back too
Was
to
he?
Darwin, yeah. And I think how that would go would be he'd sent the specimens back, but then he sent him kind of this hypothesis. And along with that hypothesis, Darwin went ahead and kind of wrote out his own kind of rough outline and sketch. And then they had given it to a publisher to send out to the society so they could kind of be measured against each other to see which one they sort of went with more.
Yeah.
And then from there, he blows out the origin of species, and it changes so many ideals. Along with these mixed reviews, he wasn't always the bulldog. He wasn't going to go out and he wasn't going to fight. He wasn't going to debate. But he had these guys in his corner that would go out and debate these theology people and go out and talk to these divine representatives about the certain different things. And they would have like debates in squares. He would only get really the stories of what was happening from a couple of his friends that were there and then whoever was going out and doing it for him. Darwin didn't ask for this. These were people that believed in him enough and believed in the theories enough that they were able to fight for him on a public stage. And
this is a big fight.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if we, have glossed over this or anything, but this book contradicts the majority of what people believe on the planet at this time. It's weird to say that because nowadays the science is what's believable. Evolution is just a thing that is widely accepted as the way shit all came together. But for him at this time, he's really the first guy through the wall of saying, hey, I'm about to not only challenge, but I'm about to disprove all of the stuff you guys have been peddling as scientific fact for all these years about the creation of all of the species on our planet. This isn't the work of one divine creator. This has been taking place due to nature determining this since the inception of life on the planet. And when you're the first person to propose such a radical shift in ideology like that, you got to have some fucking nuts on you if you're the guy that's going out representing the guy when you know that the guy you're debating has got the majority of people behind him.
Yeah, maybe has God on his side.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the ultimate fight to have about a theory that you're just going on belief. His books that followed would start to dive deeper into his research. The Descent of Man and the expression of the emotions in man and animals. He starts to kind of throw everything out there as far as how man descended from this single species, and he opens it up to sexual selection, starts explaining that not only are these favorable traits passed down because the other ones with less favorable traits have died off, but at the same time, there's also the reason that male peacocks have feathers. Mm-hmm. It's mating rituals. It's all of these different things that you have to attract a mate, which we know very well goes straight into humans, and we do the exact same things. His final two books kind of backed off of humanity a little bit. They were The Power of Movement in Plants and The Formation of Vegetable Mold Through the Action of Worms And The botany world just went nuts over this because this guy has been hanging out in the biology realm. He's blowing people's brains just with all of these different theories and everything like that.
We want to taste.
Yeah. And then he turns back to the botany program and he starts firing these things off. He goes into carnivorous plants, which is so cool to me that he would find like species of Venus flytraps. He would bring them back. He saw that these plants were acting almost like animals in the way that they would be able to catch food. And then going through dissecting them, he realized that the dissolution of the food into nutrients was actually done by acid, just like what happens in
a
an
stomach,
animal.
right?
Yeah, in a stomach.
He does a book as well called The Variation of Animals and Plants Under Domestication. So he's trying to attack this and prove this from so many different angles. Not only just, when you're looking at a book talking about evolution over the course of like history of life on this planet, it's almost too big.
Yeah.
People, especially at this time where the majority of people probably aren't highly educated and don't have the internet or whatever, it's too much to really kind of like, it's much more palatable. The whole thing with religion is it serves to provide the answers in which science cannot answer at that time. It's the things that are unexplainable that they just make up. It's like telling your kid something. You tell your kid a nice fairy tale to make it easily digestible, and you also tell them that Santa's not going to bring them presents if they keep acting like a little shit. So there's also your incentive program like there is fucking heaven. Whereas what he's trying to do is make it easily digestible and relatable for people. So he's like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and go one step further to try to explain this maybe a little bit closer to home. We have these variations on animals that we have domesticated. We are changing these animals into animals that produce more milk, that produce more meat. We're breeding out the animals that are sickly or runts and everything like that. In the same way that nature also does that, we're doing the same thing with our domestication. We're picking crops of rice or crops of corn that produce bigger yields that are better to eat. Like, I'm not saying we're doing this thing ourselves. So it's not so far-fetched to think that this couldn't have just happened in nature itself.
Well, and if we can figure it out, why would it? Are we all divine creators as well?
Yeah.
Because if we can do it, why can't they do it? We were able to figure out how to trap a wolf and then bring it all the way down, all the way back to a beagle.
Yeah.
It's just the way that works can only make sense if you believe that it can happen naturally too, because the only factor is just nature in that.
Mm-hmm.
So, unfortunately, his health issues kind of come to get. Do you have anything before we jump into health?
No, like, when he came out with those books, he was actively writing those books later and publishing those books later in life. He's not super active within the community because of his health and everything. He's not able to go out and do these debates, which is why he kind of has these proxies that are doing it. But he tries to kind of live a quiet and secluded life while still like you said, he's continually going through with things that are brought up as far as, challenges to his theories. And if they have some, merit to them, he's integrating those in and saying, okay, well, I guess I was wrong here. Let's go this. Let me find the scientific way to explain this. So he's just constantly doing this, but, eventually it does catch up to him. And, 1882.
Diagnosed with coronary thrombosis and heart disease, which, I don't know how they would have diagnosed heart disease now and not science had to have caught up to have figured it out somehow.
He's 73 at this time, right?
Yeah, that's true. He is getting on in age. Coronary thrombosis, I'm sure that had something to do with the heart palpitations that he'd carried through most of his life.
Some type of early symptom for it.
Yeah, it was just Father Time finally caught up to his ailments and there wasn't really a turnaround. He died at Downhouse April 19th, one day short of the holiday, 1882, of heart failure. And they were planning on throwing him in a box and burying him, I think, at the family estate.
Yeah, he was going to get buried in the family plot.
But there was so much of a push from kind of the elites and in Parliament and from all of his friends that he was actually buried in Westminster Abbey next to Isaac Newton.
Yeah. how fucking nuts is that? Like, of
Yeah.
course, he never knew something like that was going to happen, but and it sucks it happens,
After you die.
after you die. But to receive the recognition for the contribution in science through this petition and this lobbying of like all these people in positions of power and in the scientific community to, being buried in Westminster Abbey. We talked about who else was buried at Westminster Abbey that we've done an episode on someone else that was buried there. We'll have to come back.
Isn't
to that.
it anybody that's been knighted?
I don't think it's anybody that's been knighted, but the royal family is
Oh,
also
yeah.
interned at Westminster Abbey. So to be interned there is a huge honor. And yeah, to be buried close to Isaac Newton, who was one of his like idols, that's crazy. It shows how much they recognize his contribution to modern science. And it's something that, like you said, if you're choosing to have dinner with him, historical figure, to be able to say, hey, we're now at a point when the stuff that you thought and you determined, now most people believe that.
Religion is still pitching a fit. They're still putting up a fight against it.
Do you think it's more than 50% are still on the creationism wagon? I mean, I guess you do have to take into account countries outside of the United States and kind of what their primary form of like worship is or belief.
I think even the Catholic Church came out and said that evolution was possible, but they went the divine creation route.
I thought one of the popes came out and was pretty science-minded and said something. Maybe he was talking about just how they can exist side by side and both be true at the same time or something.
Yeah, the divine creator created things, and then those things evolved.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's a scapegoat. There's no... it's.
You're basically trying to just
I was still
save
right.
face. You're trying to save face as much as you can. But yeah, a guy whose contributions to just science and the general way people think can't really be undersold.
I got to think that the guy had a lot of joy. I got to think that every single time he ran an experiment that proved a theory, it was just like that aha moment had to have happened so many times in his life with just so many different things.
I think that had he not even been pushed to or had the desire to publish or document anything like that, he still would have been doing this as a hobby.
Oh, yeah.
Just for love of it and determining the stuff on his own. But the fact that he actually, thank God, lived long enough to get his theory down pat and everything is, yeah. Yeah, what would have happened had he like kicked the bucket and someone else would have come along and been like, I don't understand what any of this is.
I think that we probably would have gotten there eventually, but
there was the other guy working on it and everything, but to be the first, being the first, you're the king. It has its perks, but at the same time, when you're challenging shit as serious as he did, you're going to get fucking bloody. And he did, but he fucking went through it. He never stopped. Like you said, his whole life was just a constant science experiment.
And to go along with that, not to say that everything that Darwin put out, I agree with.
They're not all going to be hits.
No, but as far as like the theory of evolution, that all makes sense to me. There's still jumps in this single species theory that are kind of tough because we do have... This is back at a time when I think they had one Neanderthal that they didn't even know was a Neanderthal at that point. But now that we've found kind of these other... They're not quite bridge species yet. Like, we haven't found anything that's definitive. This is how we evolved from apes.
Yeah.
There's Lucy or whatever her name is.
We haven't gone back far enough to find where the deviation was.
Yeah.
And I think the issue with that is the deviation is not going to be quick. You're not just going to... Because whatever you find that's closer to humans, you still have to keep going back to see where the different evolutions happen. So it's never... I don't think it's ever going to end. You're never going to hit that moment where it's like, this is the one. It's just we found this one that is this old. So now we have to try to find something that goes back even further.
And that's where it kind of falls short, is the fact that we haven't been able to uncover something yet.
Yeah.
And so until that day happens, it's kind of tough to make the full jump into it. But at the same time, what he's given us, the research that's gone on because of what Darwin did, has changed the world in so many different ways that had it been 20 years later that we'd figured it out, we'd just be 20 years less advanced with what we know about.
I think that's a good ending point.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us for another week of this shit, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit him with it.
Our Instagram is historically high pod, historically high pod, and we are on Twitter at historically high. That's historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.